Johan Hassel from Global Progress Action Mission, Matt Upton from Labour Together, and Harry Quilter-Pinner from IPPR.
Thank you, Alita. So I'm Matt from Labour Together. I'm really proud to be hosting today with our friends at IPPR and the Centre for American Progress. I definitely recognise a few faces from yesterday. We started off in King's Cross. And anybody who heard me give my introductory remarks yesterday will know I'm quite a big fan of King's Cross. It's the biggest, or one of the biggest, urban regeneration projects in Europe, an area, for those who know it, completely transformed from what it was, and now sits at the heart of something called the Knowledge Quarter, which has institutions like the British Library, where we hosted yesterday, some of the best universities in the world, but also alongside that, cutting-edge organisations working on science, technology, medical research, and so on and so forth. And I think the whole King's Cross development is such a great sign of Britain, the kind of confidence of Britain looking ahead to the future, and a sign that Britain can actually get things done. And then today, obviously a very, very different vibe, as Alita touched upon. We're in somewhere much more historic today, not just Central Hall, but obviously Westminster itself, the home, the symbol of parliamentary democracy, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And for me, it was really, really important for people that travelled so far to come to the conference and come and see London and the UK, that we're able to show you those two sides of the country, the future, where we're heading, but also the historic past that makes Britain such a great place to be. Now, I think that analogy of past and future, and history and future, actually works quite well as well when thinking about the challenges facing progressives. Now, we all know, I know for my country, and I know it's the same from some of the conversations yesterday for your countries, that so many people are losing faith in the idea that the future can bring something better for them and for their families. The idea that the future increasingly is something to be feared rather than something to be embraced. And equally, some of the historical discussions and arguments that we thought were just settled way in the past are now we're having to fight for them all over again. The idea that democratic countries, the idea that democratic institutions can actually deliver what people need in today's world. And I think that is the challenge that we face as progressives. Do we have the answers to those questions? And I mean, sometimes I think we can lack confidence in this. I don't mean reacting to what populists are saying. I mean, do we have the answers? Are we on the front foot? Can we show that this is where the excitement, the energy is around some of the big debates in policy and in politics? Now, yesterday, from the conversations that I had, I think we showed that is the case. Today, when you look at the exceptional lineup that we've got, I think we'll prove it again. But I will hand over to Johan to say a little bit more about the conference.
Thank you, Matt. Friends, leaders, fellow progressives, during the most consequential political moment of our time, the Global Progress Action Summit brings together centre-left leaders to discuss the world's most pressing challenges to advance a new progressive policy agenda. The Global Progress Summit demonstrates the unity of purpose and the urgency for actions that progressive governments, leaders and change makers share. As the largest gathering of progressive leaders in the world, the Global Action Summit creates connections, ideas and outcomes to drive a global agenda for the future. This year's themes, Governing for Working People, is set in an age of insecurity where global progressives need to find a moment to unite, to meet today's challenges, to deliver bold policies that deliver security, prosperity and democracy for all. We are a global progressive movement, which are strong, confident, and we are forward-looking. And here in London, we are setting out the direction for the future. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your leadership. And over to Matt and Harry.
Hi, everyone. So Matt has welcomed you all to London, and Johan's told you about the history and the heritage of the Global Progress Summit. So it falls to me to tell you a bit about what we're expecting here today and the program that we've built for you. So the context today is really clear. A quarter of the way through this century, everyone, everywhere, seemingly all at once, wants out of the status quo. And the question is, what do we move into? What's the new consensus? And so far, the populist right is leading that argument, both at the ballot box, where we see that in recent decades, nearly half the population are either voting for populist parties or they're not voting at all. And both of those groups are basically rejecting the status quo. But also in the battle of ideas, particularly in the last few years, what we've seen is the terms of the debate being dominated and set by the populist right. Whether it's on what the state is for and who it should be governed in the interests of, who gets to be a citizen, and what the rights and responsibilities of citizens are, or how nations should relate to global markets and to other nations. This means that progressives need to renew. We need to be able to come up with better answers to the big questions that voters are putting to us, and be able to solve the daily challenges that people face. And today's program has been built to try and showcase some of the energy and the ideas and the dynamism that we see across the world where progressives are in power. Without new ideas, we risk either reaching back for old ones and trying to repeat the past, and that will not work in this new future, or trying to imitate our opponents, which only boosts their brand and heightens the divisions they flourish on. So in this context, the most valuable resource is imagination, is new ideas, is being bold and confident and making distinctly progressive arguments about what the world needs now and why we have the answers to the challenges people face. And so I hope what you'll see on stage here today is a host of leaders and thinkers and activists who are making those arguments, who are doing the hard work. And I hope that we will be part of a conversation that helps define what comes next. Before I step away, you're going to see a host of amazing stars on stage here today. But the real stars are those that have managed to put this conference on. And they're backstage, downstairs right now, making sure that we're all here and that we're able to have this conversation. So I want to say thank you to all of the teams from CAP, from IPPR and Labour Together who've made this happen. And in particular, they won't be here to hear me say this because they're all busy, but Jess, Aleri, Ollie, Rhiannon and Ali have done an amazing job in making this happen, so they're the real stars of the show here today. Thank you all, and I hope you have a great day, and I'm going to hand back over to Alita.
Welcome again, everyone. Now we're moving on to our next session on the AI dilemma. AI, of course, is not just about technology or the revolutionaries around it. It's about power, democracy, and whether people can trust that progress won't leave them behind. So on our panel today, we have Alexandra Geese, member of the European Parliament, who helped shape the EU's landmark Digital Services Act. We have also got Farida Bedway, a Ghanaian entrepreneur and disability advocate, whose fintech innovations have brought digital banking to thousands. We also have Emma Lopez Araujo, Spain's Federal Secretary for Economic Policy and Digital Transformation, leading efforts to embed AI in industrial strategy. We also have Tim Wu, a Columbia law professor. He's visiting Oxford, and he's a former White House advisor and the thinker who coined net neutrality. And guiding the conversation, we have Megan Shahi from the Center for American Progress. Over to you, Megan.
Good morning. Can folks hear me? Yeah. Awesome. Well, I hope everyone is sufficiently caffeinated and ready for this conversation. I get the great honor of kicking off our public programming for the day, so thank you all for being here. The session title is The AI Dilemma, Governing for a Digital Future. And I think we're at a really pivotal moment in society as progressives, and really at the intersection of democracy and a choice on choosing democracy going forward for our future, and the advent of technology, particularly with the way generative AI and AI has really come onto the scene and blown up in a very big way. And so today I'm honored to be guiding this conversation. I'm surrounded on all sides by the real experts who I'll introduce in a minute. But the big question we're really seeking to answer here is, how do we govern AI as progressives in a way that protects people, strengthens the economy, and simultaneously prevents and mitigates the far-right authoritarian regime and the risks to the way we really see AI thriving in the future, and how to manage those risks and also simultaneously manage the opportunities, of which there are many. So with that, I will introduce our panelists, and we'll get things started. So to my right, we have MEP Alexandra Giza, hailing from Germany. Ms. Giza is a leading digital policymaker within the European Greens, who played a key role in developing the EU's Digital Services Act, or DSA. She sits on the Industry, Budget, Internal Market, and Women's Rights Committees in the European Parliament, and is a prominent voice on international and social issues. To her right is Farida Bedwi. Ms. Bedwi is a leading tech entrepreneur who co-founded Logicel Limited and pioneered the development of GCoody, a cloud-based banking platform now widely used by microfinance institutions across Ghana. She's on the board of Ghana's National Communications Authority, previously worked as a principal software engineer at Microsoft, and is currently a platform product consultant at Digital Opportunity Trust, where she's part of the team building and managing digital systems that support innovation and youth engagement across Africa. To my left, we have Enma Lopez. Ms. Lopez is the Spanish Federal Secretary for Economic and Digital Transformation and deputy spokesperson of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party. She's advised successive prime ministers and has been central to setting the country's strategy on economic, industrial, and digital issues. And lastly, on the far left for me is Tim Wu. Tim is a professor at Columbia Law School, the former special assistant to President Biden for technology and competition policy in the Biden-Harris administration, and now visiting at Oxford. He coined the phrase net neutrality in 2003 in the White House and was hailed as the architect of the administration's anti-monopoly agenda. Lastly, he authored the forthcoming book, The Age of Extraction: How Tech Platforms Conquered the Economy and Threatened Our Future Prosperity. So with that, quite the bios. We'll dive right in, wasting no time. So I will open with a high-level question that I would love all our panelists to really start with. Enma, we'll start over with you. What is the biggest challenge that progressives, folks in the room and out of the room, face in governing AI? And how do we tackle that challenge in a way that not just doesn't just consider policymakers, but also considers people?
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for giving us this amazing opportunity to talk about probably one of the key topics of these times. From my perspective, the big deal is not falling into the false dilemma between advancing and regulating. They are not opposite, and in our perspective, they must be together. Why so? Because if we have rules in the real life, why don't we have that in the digital life? Do we really want the digital life to become some kind of the Far West? We don't. But actually, we cannot deny the advance. We need to embrace it. And to embrace it, we have also to create public policies that doesn't leave anyone behind. That has been on the mind of the Spanish government during all those years. For us, it's very important not only to create like the material conditions for AI to develop, for instance, 5G in almost the full territory of Spain, but also this high-speed velocity broadband. It's right now in the 95% of our territory, but also giving grants to all these small companies. The 95% of our companies are really, really small. We call it pymes. And given them the opportunity to also embrace that technology. And also we're talking about rights. We have passed this digital act with rights, and not only we've created an agency to protect and to preserve all those rights. We are talking about digital disconnection, we are talking about neutrality, we are talking about things that in real life are so clear, but they must be also in the digital life. So as a sum up, that could be that we need to embrace it, we need to regulate it, and we need to advance in that sovereignty, not only in language, that of course is important, but also in terms of chips, in terms of semiconductors, in terms of all these algorithms and the data that is going to rule the next years of our lives.
Thank you. Tim, we'll turn to you.
Sure, thank you. It's great to be here. I think this conference has been great and very inspirational and motivating, so thank you again for having me on this panel and being here in general. I think the rise of artificial intelligence does pose significant challenges for the progressive movement, and I'll say why. I think it's very important for progressives that we remain a movement that is serious about the future, serious about growth, optimism, building an economy, and no one wants to be in the country that's left behind.
Exactly.
On the other hand, I think we do have to learn from some of the lessons of the last revolution, of the internet revolution itself. The promise in that time, thinking back to the 90s and the early thousands, is that the internet was going to make everybody rich. It was very simple. Didn't matter where you go. Geography was no longer going to matter. Doesn't matter where you were, everybody was going to make it. Because you could work from home, you could invent an app, you could do this, you could do that, you could do this. 30 years later, we look back, and in fact, there was an acceleration of the process of winner regions and loser regions that was accelerated by the internet. And when you think about it, what happened was that mainly the returns went to the platforms, mainly in the United States, mainly on the coast. And the rest of the world, and where I live or lived in most of the United States, got a lot of great stuff, was able to buy things quickly and so forth, but didn't reap the same kind of returns. And so I think as the AI revolution goes forward, I think we have to have that example in mind. And we have to think about a kind of building that builds the entire economy, not at the expense of parts of the economy. Frankly, I think voters are attuned to this. I mean, voters are more skeptical of AI than they are of the internet. People are just actively worried about having their jobs replaced. So I think thinking through the economics is really important. I don't think we should want our countries or our regions to become satellites of Silicon Valley, economic satellites of Silicon Valley, nor do I think you want a situation where that you're competing with tax breaks or whatever you can to try to beg for little crumbs of investment. I think if you want a tech industry, you need to have a tech industry. I think if you want to have AI, you have to have AI. But depending on this model, of hoping to lure a little bit of investment is, I think, a risky proposition if you look at the history of the internet in the last 30 years.
Thank you, Tim. Alexandra, we'll turn to you.
Well, I think what we have tried to do is look at AI as a technology. And what AI is today is a power structure. It's an enormous power structure. Just let me give you two examples. I think the first one is the monopoly on information that large language models now have. If we increasingly use those large language models to produce text, that text goes to the internet. This is what AI models are trained on. You see how big the influence is. And we're already seeing that, for example, NewsGuard showed that there was a Russian disinformation campaign that produced text just to train AI models, and 30% of that material spreading disinformation about the war against Ukraine in Russian and Ukrainian language ended up in those large language models, in those AI chatbots. There are other examples from Elon Musk even being proud of saying, well, we tweak the algorithm, we change the output of Grok. So if you control the global knowledge production, this is pure power. And we see in the US the attack on universities, the attack on teachers, the attack on education in general. This is a global effort to reduce knowledge, to reduce the access to objective knowledge and to control the knowledge production. The second point is that AI is an infrastructure. It's about data centers, it's about satellite, it's about undersea cables. Where does this information travel? It's about having your products and services used by basically every European company. I speak for the European Union here as a European Parliament lawmaker. So that gives you a power to blackmail people. Very simply. And now we see many of these companies teaming up with President Trump as basically their first lobbyist, who is asking the European Union very, very actively and threatening us with visa restriction, threatening us with sanctions, threatening us with tariffs, that we make a big exception for US companies that don't have to abide by our laws. So this is attacking sovereignty as such. This is taking away the sovereignty from the people. If we believe in our democracy, the sovereignty lies with the people. And what some of these tech companies, together with the Trump administration, are saying, no, we decide what you can do. We decide your regulation. We decide your legislation. We decide whether you can or cannot protect your people. And that is totally unacceptable. And the third point is, where does the added value go? It's the value extraction. I hope Tim will elaborate on that a little. Because the big promise is an increase in productivity. But where exactly is that increase in productivity? Is that really in the industrial production? Or is it more the possibility to have less workers you need to pay? In that case, those workers were paying taxes. Now they might need social services. So where does the added value go? Does it stay in Europe? Does it stay in the place where you employ the AI tool or the infrastructure? Or does it go to a different country and is not contributing to the welfare of the people living in that country? That are the big questions. On the other hand, what is the solution? I think it is actively engaging in that space. I'm not only a lawmaker, I'm also a founder of the Eurostack initiative. That is a movement together with the industry to build a European digital infrastructure. And this is not about creating a wall around Europe. It's about breaking up those walled gardens, breaking up those monopolies, creating open standards, using open source software, creating a network of companies producing AI technologies, AI tools, and everything that goes with it, the infrastructure that goes with it, not only in Europe, but also all over the world by companies and jurisdictions that do not want to accept that power structure, but that want to keep that technology open and servicing the people and not just a few billionaires.
Thank you. Farida?
Okay. So for me, the whole of yesterday and the sessions, I felt very excluded because Africa wasn't mentioned at all in the conversation. And our problems, I mean, obviously, things are a bit different for us, but we still have similar issues, especially when it comes to things like unconscious bias and all those things, when it comes to AI. Because, for instance, if you are looking at doing agentic AI, where we are setting up a health monitoring system, which would make recommendations on things like maternal health issues. Most of the data is coming from the West. Most of the data being trained is coming from the West. It's not coming from Africa. So obviously the parameters and things will be different. So a couple of weeks ago, I was actually talking about why Africa needs to get more involved in the conversation. Because if not, what's going to happen is that things that will work for people in the West would be implemented for us, and it will not work because our parameters are different. And our our social constructs, our cultural constructs will not come into play in the whole conversation. So it's very important that in Africa, we also look at how can we contribute to this whole AI conversation. We are the second biggest planet, we are the second biggest continent in the world. We have the largest population of youth. So it's very important that we also play a major part in this whole thing. And when we have similar problems when it comes to elections and misinformation and all those things, though not at the same scale as in the US or Europe, but we still have it. So, I mean, it's very important that we also get involved in the learning, in training the learning models and making sure that our data is represented within the learning models as well.
Thank you. So, as we're in the UK and have two Europeans on the panel, I'd love to turn to them to maybe answer a two-parter. That tension between regulating and innovation. We talk extensively about it in the United States. It's part of the reason that the right defends the lack of regulation for technology and that they believe it will stifle innovation and that it is a zero-sum black and white game. And we've seen cases in Europe that really prove that otherwise. And we have two experts here who have worked directly on various pieces of regulation in Europe. And so maybe we'll start with you, Alexandra. How did you approach the DSA and the AI Act when it comes to the right protections, but also not stifling innovation, or really responding to that argument that you're trading off against innovation in order to protect? And how do you respond to that with other members in Parliament and the kind of folks in the room? And then, Emma, you talked about this in your opening, but how do you think about that as far as when advising the Spanish leadership in navigating this issue?
Well, I contest that there's a trade-off between innovation and regulation. There's good regulation and there's bad regulation. And what we shouldn't do is bad regulation. I think that is the point. And just to make an example, I don't know if anybody has seen the Netflix series Dopesick. It's about the opioid crisis in the US. And there was this one scene where the Sackler family starts discussing, well, we should start doing this in Europe as well. We should get doctors to prescribe these opioids, highly addictive, one of the big causes of the opioid crisis. And then after like a minute, they rule it out because they realize that would never fly in Europe. It would just never work. Well, in the US, it was sufficient to buy the one single person signing off that from the FDA. This is why in the US, the number of drug-related deaths per 100,000 is 10 times higher than in Europe. It's because we have better regulation. So that's good regulation. I totally agree. In Europe, we have a lot of bad regulation. We have a lot of paperwork, and we should get rid of it. But let's look at what is good and what is bad. So what we did with the Digital Services Act, for example, we have different company sizes, basically. We look at how big is the company. Is there a risk coming from that company? So for smaller and middle-sized companies, the obligations are very, very basic. And I really defy anybody to find a European company contesting the DSA on the basis that it's too much red tape. While we do have serious obligation for the very large online platforms, the ones with more than 45 million users in the European Union. That's like something like 20-25 companies. This is how you do good regulation. You look at what is really the risk and how can respond companies to that, and then you do targeted regulation really addressing that risk. This is how you need to do it.
Can I just add something?
Yes, please.
So when it comes to regulation, I'm a software engineer by profession, and you don't want to kill creativity. That is what regulation can do. It can kill creativity because then people will not be as innovative as they want to be, because they know that if something new is coming up, it could be subject to regulation, and it could be, the idea could be mixed from the beginning. So at the end of the day, there has to be a real balance because the difference between the health industry and the technology industry is that with the health industry, you're just addressing one illness or one sickness or something. That is what you're solving. But with technology, the possibilities are endless. You don't know what can come out of anything. I mean, I can sit down to write something, then before I know I have come up with something that I didn't even think about. So if I have a regulatory body that is actually monitoring my work and telling me I can only do A and I cannot do B, then it would kill the creativity. So we have to strike a real balance, and I don't think we have been able to get it right up to now. That is why the social media platforms and things are largely unregulated, because where do you draw the line?
Thank you. Emma, turn it to you.
Regarding what we were saying in our yesterday's conversation, we have to link all this AI discussion with our will to protect our democracies. That's something that is super important. It's not only about individual rights that it is. It's also about how to keep safe our democracy. How can we prevent the attacks and intervention in our elections? How can we keep safe our people from all this deep fake news, where in the future, but it's not that far away, it's going to be super difficult to define what is real to what is not. So in that case, AI Act and all the legislation we've done in Spain, I think is crucial to protect what we have and stop being like, I don't know how to say it, like probably in a weak position. So there are some stats that says that in 2035, 58% of our jobs, of our employments, are going to be affected by AI. That's also an opportunity, because that could mean an increase of 8% on the GDP. That's really good. And it hasn't mean necessary to lose all that jobs, but only we are talking about improving the way that we work, like losing all these mechanical tasks that last us, and also a great opportunity to increase our productivity. For Spain, for the Spanish economy, for instance, that's a huge deal. But it needs, for instance, for trade unions, how to train all our people to embrace that technology without leaving it behind. It could be also a great opportunity to stop all this bureaucracy, to put together the administration and the citizens, because you have the opportunity to talk to the administration in your natural speaking, in your natural language. So you just talk with the machine and say, please, I need that. And it's going to be much easier and also quicker. So for that instance, that could be not only something that could be weak for democracy, but also a strengthen. And I think that's the point of view that we need to tackle, to embrace that opportunity and to avoid all the risks.
Tim, jumping off the economic incentives and impact on economy point, we talked a little bit yesterday about some of the kind of concentration of power and wealth beneficiaries being among the platforms and the LLM developers. Yeah. From your time in the Biden NEC and your forthcoming book, which we're all excited to read, how do you think about addressing those perverse incentives, right? We talked yesterday about how I spent time at the platforms, and they're set up in a way that will be able to change, really. And so how do you think about that, and what's your advice for this group as they navigate this?
Yeah, I think it dovetails with what was just spoken about as, this trade-off between growth and regulation. So I won't deny, I think it's fair to say that over-regulation can hurt growth. I don't want to lie about that. But there's a very big difference between that and making sure that the spoils of the wealth created are distributed more evenly than last time. What we let happen over the last 40 years is we allowed the tech platforms, which are undeniably convenient, essential, have become the platforms of our economy. we've let them become these extraction technologies that just take too much from the rest of the economy. And I think any mind towards AI policy has to, as you said, embrace technological advance as a means of generating wealth, but at the same time, make sure that we have a technology that is infrastructural, that is building for the whole economy. I think progressives need a build agenda, but it needs to be a build agenda that just doesn't say, oh, those guys, those 4 companies are going to build our future and take all the money. It has to be, how are these AI platforms, how is this kind of infrastructure, maybe like the railroads, maybe like electricity, going to support a lot of other economic activity? That is the kind of build agenda I think progressives can get behind. I think progressives need to harness the power of AI. I mean, this is an incredible time to build things. This is a period where there's all kinds of possibilities. We should, there is this opportunity for flourishing, for countries to build different kind of companies than ever before, kind of the original promise of the internet. And the question is the kind of policies government takes to allow the entire economy to build, as opposed to hoping a few companies are going to build the whole future for us and take all the money.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the themes that I think came through there and that has come up yesterday extensively is on messaging and how the left, I think, can candidly do better than we have been historically. Alexandra, what is your, we chatted in the working group yesterday, what is your advice or your thought on how we can really scale a smaller number of succinct messages across the progressive movement? How would you advise this group to do that effectively if you were given the chance, which you are in your position?
Well, to do that in a second. Well, I think it's important to challenge that dominant narrative, like, for example, innovation versus regulation, and say innovation is what serves the people and the planet. That is, for example, I think a message we could all agree on in the progressive spectrum, and try to bring that message everywhere, and then have people, telling you what exactly does that mean. For me, it means, as a European lawmaker, it means we support European industry, we support European companies. I mean, we are supposed to be the progressives who don't necessarily accept the status quo. Who has said that 5 companies would control all this AI power structure? We can build something else. I mean, Taiwan has shown how to do that. India is showing how to do that. Why shouldn't we do that and support that effort as progressives to create a more distributed form of power where everybody can harness the potential of artificial intelligence, but we also have the democratic power as legislators to protect the people from the harms, and we're already seeing the harms. I think that is a common message. Artificial intelligence really needs to benefit the people, and in order to benefit the people, we need a lot of companies working on it in a very networked way. It needs to be open, it needs to be transparent, and let's do this together.
Thank you. Farida, you had really good points about bringing the Global South into the conversation more prominently. And that's something really a priority for global progress as well, in really uniting the perspectives on AI and on progressive issues more broadly. How can we, as progressives, do a better job of incorporating the importance and the feedback and the prominence of the rising Global South, and how technology impacts the Global South maybe in different ways than it does other countries? How can we do better at incorporating that perspective?
So I think we need to engage a lot more with African tech companies, as well as the governments. They are very important, because we have a similar problem as she just said, because of where the data is. Data is the most expensive commodity these days. But if you have data, you have everything. Our data is being housed within these 5 big tech companies. We have no control over it. So I think I've been advocating for Africa to have its own data centers where we can have our data, where we can train our own data models, so that we will not be reliant on information from the US or wherever, because it's scary knowing that your whole infrastructure and everything is being housed in a country or in a region, which if today they decide they are going to cut you off, yeah, I mean, you're screwed. So it's very important that you come and you listen to us. Because for too long, the West has been telling us what to do, instead of asking us, how do you want us to help you? The conversation has to change from do this to we are partners. How can we work together to make the world a better place?
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's time. So unfortunately, we have to wrap it. But a round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Well, our next session takes us to one of the defining challenges of our time. That's migration. The UN estimates that more than 120 million people worldwide have been forced from their homes. While most are hosted in low and middle income countries, irregular migration into Europe and the US has reshaped politics, fueling populism and really testing democracies. The question for progressives is whether we can manage this scale of displacement in ways that reassure citizens at home while staying true to their values. On the next panel today, we've got Peter Hummelgaard, Denmark's Minister of Justice from the Social Democrats, Diego Rubio, Director of the Cabinet of the Prime Minister of Spain, Dan Restrepo, Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress. He's also a former advisor to President Barack Obama. Frank Shary, founder and chief executive of America's Voice, long a leading advocate for immigration reform in the US. And guiding this conversation, we have Christabel Cooper, Director of Research at Labour Together. Thank you. Over to you, Christabel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome everyone to this panel on migration. It is entitled Migration, the Global Governance Challenge of Our Time. And I don't think that that is an exaggeration. Within the last few days, US President Donald Trump has told the UN, it is time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. Your countries are going to hell. And yet, whether Donald Trump likes it or not, we are living in an era of mass displacement. The UN currently estimates that more than 120 million people worldwide have been forced from their homes. While it's low and middle income countries that host the vast majority of those people, irregular migration into Europe and into the United States has disrupted our politics. It has fueled the populist right, and it is placing a strain on our democracies. So the challenge for the centre-left is to find a way to manage this scale of displacement that takes into account the concerns of existing populations in our countries, but which also seeks to maximise the contributions that migrants can bring and remains true to our socially democratic values. We've got a brilliant panel here. I think you guys have already been introduced. So I won't go through that again, though I would just like to add a special thanks to Lasse Ryberg from Denmark, who has stood in at the last moment. As many of you may be aware, the Danish delegation, much of it has not been able to arrive due to what we can only assume is Russian aggression in closing Copenhagen airport at the moment. So big thanks to Lasse for standing in. And I will come to Lasse first. At the Danish general election in 2022, the governing Social Democrats achieved their best result in 20 years, while the hard-right Danish People's Party gained 3% of the vote. Yeah, absolutely. A rare success for the centre-left over the hard-right at a time when migration is such a prominent issue in our politics. Would you be able to just give us an overview of the approach that the Danish government has taken with regard to migration, both in terms of the policy and in terms of the narrative that you were trying to get across to voters?
Yeah, I will certainly try to do that and maintain the focus on an overview and not a historical run-through. But it's important to know the political history in Denmark in terms of immigration to understand why we are at the point we are now. I mean, we all concur that we live in troubling times with war, instability, and we are seeing right-wing party taking power in numerous countries around the world. So therefore, it has been very important to us to be in sync with our population. There are no easy solutions. Often in our progressive family, we have this mantra saying, when they go low, we go high. We would say, when they go low, we need to go relevant. This is a question about relevance without losing your fundamental ideological aspects. Already 30 or 40 years ago, we were warned as a party by a lot of our Danish, a lot of our local mayors. They were saying they experienced that immigration was getting out of hand. It created a lack of social coherency, and the balances were simply off. We struggled with that debate, those policies, for decades internally in our party. In 2001, we lost power. We lost the election primarily due to immigration issues and issues of crime. So all until we had some years in government during Healey Thorning-Schmidt, but it was not such a great success in those terms. In 2018, we had a new leader, Mrs. Frederiksen, and she set out a new course, a new comprehensive policy in terms of immigration and integration in our country. And our analysis was that we needed to pivot on these subjects in order to get permission from a lot of the voters we have lost during all of those years we were out of government. We had a lot of policy propositions that were a good thing for them in terms of pension age, early retirement, expanding welfare, but they simply weren't listening to us because of our earlier positions on immigration and integration. And one other thing, and that's hard to choose, but the aspect of being authentic on this subject cannot be understated. Mrs. Frederiksen, she usually says that voters can spot if you are talking about a firm stance on immigration while you're crossing your fingers on your back. They can sniff it out, so you actually have to mean it, and that's a harder thing to, you cannot choose that, you must own it in your heart, yeah. All right, but in our 2018 pivoting policy, we had clear goals. We need secure borders. We needed to protect our young girls in Denmark from social control within their families. We need to increase and secure social coherency in public areas of public social housing. We need to protect the wages set up in collective bargaining. We had an ambition of bringing down or contributing at least to bring down the numbers of casualty in the Mediterranean, all the refugees and the migrants crossing the Mediterranean. And we are a small country, 6 million inhabitants with high benefits. And when you arrive in Denmark legally, as a migrant, as a refugee, you instantly get benefits. So of course we also need to maintain some kind of balance in terms of numbers. So with focus on responsibility and rights, we set a new course. Just to point out some of the actual policies, we raised the legal marrying age for non-citizens. We are seeking to establish centers for refugees in countries outside the EU. We pushed for more deportations when people are convicted for violent crimes. And we are actually relocating people, both immigrants and Danes, from the most burdened social public housing areas in order to gain coherence, social coherency, in order to re-establish those balances. And as said before, the Danish People's Party, they were at 22% in 10 years ago, and now they came out with 3.5% the last election. And the last thing I would like to say in this round is that we have both enacted hard policies, firm policies, restriction policies, but we are also pursuing a lot of the things that we usually stamp being progressive. We are at 7.7% in 0.7% in foreign aid. We are respecting and upholding international treaties. We are pushing for further deals with bordering countries. We are offering housing and benefits for those who are legally in our country, and we are enacting more anti-racism and anti-discriminatory legislation. So we are quite resolute in our firm policies, but we are also doing a lot of the things that we usually call progressives. But of course, or not of course, we are maybe communicating the firm stances more than all the traditional progressive things in order to maintain this permission with the voters to talk about them, to talk to them about a lot of the other things we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, please.
So a year after the Danish elections, the Spanish Social Democrats PSOE also won re-election with an increased share of the vote, and the hard-right party Vox losing both vote share and seats. And in case we were tempted to think that there might just be one simple, straightforward winning formula for centre-left parties on migration, PSOE approached the issue quite differently. So Diego, could you take us through the Spanish government's approach to migration?
Yes. So at the Spanish government, we know that it's important to connect with citizens' beliefs, but not with that when that makes you deploy the wrong policies. Our migration strategy is based on 4 principles. The first principle is that we have a moral and legal duty towards migrants because they're human beings, regular or irregular. This sounds basic, but nowadays, unfortunately, we keep saying it. They're human beings. The second principle is that you cannot stop migration. Maybe in the short term, if you invest a lot of resources, but never in the long term, because our forests, our deserts, our oceans are too big. And the need of those fleeing from violence or poverty is too high. So you will never stop it. That's why we believe that every single pound you invest in trying to stop migrants, you're wasting it. You should devote that money to canalize, to channel migration properly. The third principle, maybe one of the most important ones, is that all those studies published in the 60s and the 70s about the world going overcrowded were completely rubbish. This idea that by mid-century there will be too much people in the world so we won't have a space or water for them are completely flawed. The reality is that most countries, in Europe certainly, are underpopulated and that they're going to lose millions of inhabitants in the coming decades because of demographic aging. And the reality as well, and this can be proof, is that even nowadays, one of the main engines of growth for our economic models is demographic growth. If you look at Europe over the past decade alone, was more than 25% of our economic growth was driven by demographic growth. So what we believe, and AI is not going to change that, by the way. So what we believe is that in 10, 20, 30 years from now, we will look backwards and we will see 2 kinds of developed countries. Those who remain close, they will go stagnant. They will struggle to, with deficit and debt. They will struggle to keep their welfare state alive, and life for everybody will be worse. And those who remain open, they will remain growing economies, and therefore they will be able to keep their welfare states alive. And there's the fourth principle or idea, which is that we are seeing a lot of people buying the framework of the far right when they forget or ignore the fact that most of the problems that we tend to link to migration are not caused by migration, are not caused by the nationality, the religion, or the color skin of the people, are caused by poverty, inequality, lack of prospects, lack of education. So where you need to solve those problems is not to follow the far-right agenda and say we have too many migrants here. What you have to do is to invest in public services, in welfare state, because in housing, that's how you're going to really solve the problems for all the migrants and for your local citizens. This is the way we see it. And by the way, it's working. It is working.
Thank you for that. Dan Restrepo, I'd like to turn now to talk about some of the countries that are really dealing with the sharp end of mass displacement of people. Around 8 million Venezuelans have left their country over the last decade, and around 3 million of those are currently in Colombia alone. So these are huge numbers. For context, around 6 million people have fled from Syria, with about 1 million people from Syria across the whole of Europe. So Dan Restrepo, how did countries like Colombia deal with this mass displacement without losing political consent?
And I think it's important to look at Colombia's experience and Latin America's experience. As I know, when we look at migration in the Americas from a US perspective, we spend a great deal of time focused on the 15 to 20% of the migration that actually gets to the United States. And we spend far less time understanding how a region has dealt with the other 80 to 85%. And as you rightly note, Colombia is today, so a country of 40 million people has received 3 million Venezuelans, and the other 5 million that have left Venezuela in the last decade at least passed through, almost all of them passed through Colombia. So migration is very much a day-to-day reality in countries in the global south. And I think to look at what Colombia has done, and this is obviously not my story to tell, and it, quite frankly, from a political perspective, would have been more compelling, I think, from the person who was supposed to be in this seat, who is the former mayor of Barranquilla, Colombia, Jaime Pumarejo, who unfortunately couldn't join us at the last moment. And Jaime's story, from a political perspective, is a very interesting one. So during his time as mayor of Barranquilla, which is the largest Colombian city closest to the Venezuelan border, his city's population grew by 10% in a 5-year period of time, all fueled by migration. And at the end of Jaime's term in office, he left office as the most popular mayor in Colombia. We normally think that that kind of disruption, that kind of influx, it would be political death to whomever was there to have to manage it. But it wasn't for a guy like Jaime, and it wasn't for Claudia Lopez in Bogotá and other mayors. And the reason it wasn't, I think, is twofold. Is they understood, both at a national level and a local level, the importance of providing legal authorization for folks to work. So the movement from being a fiscal and social burden, migrants quickly became fiscal contributors. Colombia's working population today is somewhere between 3 and 4 years younger than it was a decade ago in a country that was aging naturally. So there's a huge fiscal benefit that has come to the reduced age in the workforce driven by migration. And they allowed that to be tapped into by providing legal status. And the other is what I call a host community. They took a host community approach to managing migration. Understanding that the social and fiscal burden falls on local communities where migrants arrive. And they decided to support the communities rather than just or even principally the migrants who were arriving. So you weren't fueling social tension by providing, quote unquote, special benefits to the new residents of Barranquilla or Bogota, but rather to the communities that were becoming their new homes. And obviously, if you're supporting those communities, you are also supporting their new residents. But doing that together, I think allowed kind of a social permission structure to take hold, and allowed folks, again, to become new residents of those communities, and to become contributors to those communities in a way that is, again, it's not perfect. Xenophobia is present in Colombia and elsewhere in the Americas, but has been tempered in a moment, in a decade, where you have seen unprecedented mobility in the Americas, because again, 25 to 30% of global mobility is taking place in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is home to only 8% of the world's population.
Thank you. I think that's so interesting, talking about contribution and support for communities as key to kind of buying political consent for really those absolutely extraordinary number of migrants that Latin America is hosting at the moment. So, Frank Sherry.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. Immigration has been cited as one of the major reasons behind Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election. And yet it's a very widely underappreciated fact that under the Biden-Harris administration, encounters with migrants at the US-Mexico border fell from a peak of 250,000 per month in December 2023 down to 30,000 a month by the time that Biden left office. You worked on the Harris campaign. Can you take us through that sort of extraordinary fact that, you know, firstly, how did the administration achieve those numbers and yet not get political credit for it, Frank? I'm not blaming you, honestly.
Everybody want to watch heartbreak happen as we speak. The President Biden got the politics and policy of immigration wrong for 3.5 years. And by the time the Biden administration got it right, not so much because of him, but because of policy officials at the senior level who got together and cracked the code. So what they did is they combined meaningful international cooperation from Mexico and other countries in the Americas. Dan had a big role in that. They also made it very hard for people to cross the border illegally, to apply for asylum, so that they weren't just let into the country and put into 7-year backlogs, meaning they were never going to be removed. And they expanded legal pathways so that people could apply for refugee and humanitarian visas. The combination undermined the business model of the smugglers. It made much more sense for a Venezuelan to apply for a humanitarian visa, fly in an airplane into America, be met by a sponsor, and have work permission, than to pay $10,000 to go to the border, be turned away, and be unable to get into the United States under law for years. So the incentive structure shifted. And so I give credit to the White House officials who got it right. I don't think President Biden actually kind of got this issue instinctually, and it's a big problem. But I think we can learn something from it. Look, I've worked on this issue for 40 years in a variety of capacities, now as a think tanker, which is new to me. I think it means I can say whatever the hell I want. But the things that work, at least in an American context, are that you've got to take the issue seriously because the voters take the issue seriously. It's not just a right-wing issue. It's an issue for it was the #2 issue in the election. And so when President Biden didn't want to talk about it because his advisors said it'll increase the salience of the issue, it's a Republican issue, stay away from it, that ceded the narrative turf to Trump and the Republicans to define the issue. It was the Biden border crisis. It was the Democrats are the party of open borders. And with no countervailing contesting narrative, that took hold among many voters. And while inflation and cost of living was the main issue in the election, the late-breaking voters, the swing voters who decided late, They favored Trump over Harris on immigration and border security by 42 points. So we end up with an authoritarian using an immigration crackdown as the edge of the spear in his authoritarian project, rather than having a sensible policy that comports with where most Americans are. So here are the three things that I think for America, the center left to get immigration right, you've got to take the issue seriously. That's not to say make it the only issue, but don't pretend it's not an issue. I think we'll see an example of the next speaker showing that in the UK they're taking it seriously. They're leaning in. Right? Number two, you've got to solve the problem. All the messaging in the world doesn't work if you don't have a serious solution. And again, credit to the folks who brought solutions to bear in year 4 of the Biden administration, but it was too late to make an electoral difference. The majority of Americans want a balanced policy. This is what the contours of the debate are often a mobilized right slinging simplistic slogans to mobilize fear and hate, and a, dare I say, a shouty left advocating for maximalist demands that make the debate seem in the public mind as it's all or nothing. If it's a debate between all or nothing, nothing is going to win.
Every time.
If it's a debate between nothing, fear and hate, simplistic solutions, scapegoating and xenophobia, and a balanced approach that says we're going to be a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws, we're going to make illegal immigration work and work to sharply reduce illegal immigration, that's where the majority of people are. Americans aren't anti-immigrant, they're anti-chaos. And the border chaos drove Trump's electoral advantage in a way that really hurt Kamala Harris's campaign. So, I learned so much yesterday by talking in some of our small group work with the Danes and the Spanish and the Swedes and the Australians. Every country has a different authentic story. But your authentic story has to be the basis for how you talk about this. In America, we're not an open borders country. We're a country that has long celebrated legal immigration and tried to deter illegal immigration. And when we tell that story of we're a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws, that's not some sort of tawdry trade-off. That is a statement of values. In fact, the best way to be either is to be both. They work together. Because when we have more control at our borders, we have more generosity for expanded legal pathways. So I think that the center-left has to find its voice on this in a way that is not intimidated by the left, not cowed by the right, and it is not aping either narrative. It's a center-left narrative that says we can solve this problem in a way, we can manage this problem in a way that reflects our values and serves our interests.
Thank you, Frank. We've just got a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to very quickly ask Diego and Lasse. I mean, centre-left parties tend to struggle with immigration because they're often trying to hold together a coalition of older working-class voters with socially conservative views, and often younger, more educated voters with socially liberal views. So if just like 1 minute on how you've held that coalition together with the immigration policy that you have in Spain.
You know, I totally get your points about this is an issue, so don't try to ignore it. But at the same time, I think one of the mistakes we are making in many places is that we are buying the idea that this is the only topic. So we are limited in the whole debate on this, and this one of the effects that it has is it makes you forget how aligned you are in other issues with your allies, right? So I guess one of the ideas is keeping a coalition together is not easy, but we've been the first coalition government in the history of Spain, actually. And I guess the golden rule is start making friends among the ranks of the other parties. and then never lose focus of the things that unite you, and don't focus only on the things that divide you. And then, you know, in our case, as we were talking before, we have the luck that the opposition makes things much easier many days. So.
Thank you, Diego. And Lasse, very quickly.
Very quickly, yeah, I don't know. We are not one of those parties or governments who feel that this is the only issue. We've tried to and been able to mostly to neutralize this subject. The vast majority of the Danish voters are behind us, and there's a big majority in parliament who supports these policies. So when we were a one-party government from 19 to 22, relying on the left on all other issues, they accepted that fact, and so they didn't overthrow the government due to their disagreement on those policies. And now we are in a coalition government with parties who also agree with this point. So I would say and immigration is not only a financial thing. A major part of our, a vast part of our fiscal surplus comes from migrant workers from Eastern European countries. We welcome them, they behave, they work, they respect the law of the land. There's no problem in saying that, and we also do that. But if you are classical progressive and you tend to focus too much on the fiscal things, the redistribution, the financial things, but what about minimum wage? What about social coherency? You need to attend to all those factors if you don't want to lose the majority of the voters.
Thank you. So I think my conclusion is that centre-left parties do not have to be powerless in the face of this issue. We've got different political situations in different countries, and the answers will be different in all of those countries. But I think you made an excellent point right at the beginning that whatever the solution, the government needs to be authentic. They need to make clear choices that are in line with the values that they feel authentically comfortable with advocating. And I think, you know, if they do that, they can both shape conditions on the ground and be able to influence the political narrative and be able to give an answer to Donald Trump's challenge. So I'd just like to thank our excellent panel, and can we have a round of applause, please?
Thank you so much to our morning panelists. They've been really, really insightful. Well, we're now going to take a very quick reset, and we'll be back in a few minutes. So make the most of this time. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Well, our next speaker is Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Sir Keir Starmer. He needs no introduction here, but he comes to this summit at a real test for his leadership. 1 year into office, under pressure from Reform UK, and on the leave of Labour conference. Just this week, he sets out plans for digital ID cards for every UK adult, which has already sparked debate about control and civil liberties. So the question is, in the next week and the months ahead, how will the Prime Minister prove that progress means delivery and not just office? Prime Minister Starmer, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Good morning, and really good to see you. And Alita, thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you to all of you here for joining us today. And can I take this early opportunity to thank all of those that work behind the scenes to bring this event together and allow us this opportunity to discuss. So thank you very much to them. Now, this is a gathering of people bound by a common cause, the patriotic renewal of our nations, that is underpinned by the values of dignity and respect, equality and fairness, and the belief that social democratic means are the best way to pursue that goal. But it's also a room that puts paid to a story we often hear in the press these days, that somehow our politics is dying out. Now, yes, we are in an era of huge challenge, but we can take heart when we look around the world. In fact, we only need to look around this room. Kristrún from Iceland, Pedro from Spain, Mark Carney, who stormed to victory in Canada at the beginning of this year, followed by Albo in Australia, and of course Jonas in Norway just a few weeks ago. So in fact, pitted against our right-wing opponents, I'd say centre-left parties are having quite a year so far. And not forgetting, there is... Good morning, Pedro. We're just hailing you being here. But not forgetting, of course, the Labour Party's victory in July of last year, getting a landslide victory here in the United Kingdom. So I'm sorry, I don't accept that argument that somehow our politics is dying out. But I do accept that it is now time for Social Democrats to confront directly some of the challenges and some of the lies, frankly, that have taken root in our societies. Because we don't just hear these stories about our politics, we also hear stories about our great countries, our communities, our cities, that simply do not match the reality that we see around us. And it's very good to have you here in London. I hope you've enjoyed yourself here in our capital city. Maybe gone out for breakfast this morning, popped into the pub for a pint last night, maybe enjoyed the last rays of sunshine in our beautiful parks. And if you have done any of those things or other brilliant things in London, you may have noticed that this city isn't the wasteland of anarchy that some would have you believe. But that, in a sense, captures what we're up against, doesn't it? And there are versions in all of your countries where places, institutions, communities are portrayed in a way that is a million miles from reality. A sort of industrialized infrastructure of grievance, an entire world, not just a worldview, created through our devices that is miserable, joyless, and demonstrably untrue. And yet, in another way, and this is the challenge, also totally cohesive. because it preys on real problems in the real world, identifies clear enemies. That's us, by the way. And at its heart, its most poisonous belief, and this was on full display here in London just under 2 weeks ago, that there's a coming struggle, a defining struggle, a violent struggle for the nation, for all of our nations. And you don't have to be a great historian to know where that kind of poison ends up. And you can just feel it in a language that is naked in its attempt to intimidate. Because it's not careless or accidental, it's part of a strategy. They want politics to be a choice between globalists and nationalists, to draw a dividing line between the elites and the people, in which somehow our rich story of patriotism and pride, our common cause with working people, our deep roots in the trade union movement in our communities, the desire and demand of working people for a voice in their future is claimed by those who have nothing in common with them or their values. Only a cynical intent to exploit their fears to benefit themselves. That is what we're up against. So we must show our politics, resolutely opposed to a status quo that doesn't deliver for working people. The worst thing we can do is to defend the status quo. It hasn't worked for working people. We must be determined to deliver change in their interests. Patriotic renewal, rooted in our own national stories, restoring pride where people live and work. We fight for our values, decency, tolerance, respect, and most importantly, we focus on the countries we can become through renewal. National renewal. Now, that's not a new argument for social democrats, but it is the beating heart of our politics, the nation state, harnessing the potential of the whole country, providing security and opportunity for working people, together squaring up to the challenges of a world that is frankly more dangerous, less secure than many of us have known in our lifetimes. We have to respond to that, not by turning inward, but with even deeper solidarity, alliances and partnerships built upon common values, the rules-based order that has kept the peace in our world since the last century. The coalition of the willing, strong not just because of the depth of our shared beliefs, but because we recognise that the security and safety of the people that we serve depends on our relationships, our willingness to stand up together across our different political traditions and not be cowed by tyranny. But to protect strength abroad, you do need security at home, economic stability, an approach to economic growth that can create wealth more fairly in the first place. Proud working-class towns and cities, so often disenchanted with mainstream politics because the economy does not work for them, and because that's been true for a very long time. And they're losing trust in our ability to deliver the change that they want to see. They don't want handouts or help. They want to stand on their own feet. I'll give you an example from the United Kingdom. Yesterday, we announced £5 billion to be spent by local people, however they see fit, in their communities, restoring a pub, reviving a community hall, reopening a youth club. But the important thing is not coming cap in hand to Whitehall to get the green light on a project, but actually allowing control to be with the communities where the funding is going, so they can choose what it's spent on, because those with skin in the game know what's best for their communities. It's about restoring control and agency, having the respect for working people to choose what's right for them. And that is how they stand proudly as partners in a social democratic nation. So our approach to the economy, investment, yes, of course, in everything from defence to energy, creating good, well-paid jobs. Industrial policy, yes, of course, our proud heritage of making things, relighting the fires and the factories across the country. In public services, absolutely, for all of us, from healthcare to transport, and financial prudence, which is non-negotiable. But it does also mean stripping out regulation so we can build more and build more quickly. And the private sector can create wealth in every community. Now, some people call this approach abundance. I have a different phrase for it, social democracy. But the way I see it, this is the defining political choice of our times. A politics of predatory grievance, preying on the problems of working people, and using that infrastructure of division against the politics of patriotic renewal, rooted in communities, building a better country, brick by brick from the bottom up, including everyone in the national story. Difference under the same flag. Because wherever you are in the world, we all have our different national symbols. And what I'll say is this: we must fight for them. Stand up to those who tell us that there's a tension between our symbols of pride and symbols of inclusion, our multi-ethnic modern nation and our history and heritage. There is not. They are one and the same thing. That's the social democratic argument. It is a powerful one, and we must never surrender it. But of course, you need more than symbols for nation building. You also need renewal. And it's important to be really clear on this. Renewal is not just fixing problems in some managerial sense. That is important, of course it is. People are very disappointed with the pace of change in government. It's so much slower than almost every other facet of their lives. So we do have to speed up. Poor delivery is a threat to mainstream politics. But renewal is a deeper argument. It means demonstrating to working people that, as well as the economy, the state is being run in their interests. And that does mean we've got to look ourselves in the mirror and recognise where we've allowed our parties to shy away from people's concerns and let the politics of purity patronise people. Now, you will all have issues in your own countries. But in Britain, it's illegal migration. And I suspect that may be the same in a number of other countries. For too many years, it's been too easy for people to come here, slip into the shadow economy, and remain here illegally. Because, frankly, we've been squeamish about saying things that are clearly true. It's not just that it's not compassionate left-wing politics to rely on labour that exploits foreign workers and undercuts fair wages, but the simple fact that every nation needs to have control over its borders. We do need to know who is in our country. Our immigration system does need to be fair if we want to maintain that binding contract that our politics is built on. Otherwise, it undermines trust, undermines people's faith that we're on their side, and their belief that the state can and will work for them. And that is why today I am announcing this government will make a new free-of-charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work by the end of this Parliament. Let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID. It's as simple as that. Because decent, pragmatic, fair-minded people, they want us to tackle the issues that they see around them. And of course, the truth is, we won't solve our problems if we don't also take on the root causes, looking upstream to tackle poverty, conflict, climate change, issues that aren't just intolerable for those of us who care about inequality and injustice wherever it's found in the world, but which have clear consequences for our own citizens. Take Russia's aggression in Ukraine. We all have a responsibility for the future of our continent, to stand tall where oppression and violence rears its head. But it is also about energy security, because Putin and other tyrants have used their control over energy supplies as a threat. They've pushed up energy bills, threatened to keep doing so unless they get their way. And that's why we're investing in our own energy, sovereign control over our own future, whether that's nuclear, wind, solar power. Now, this will create good jobs, but it will also take the boot of tyrants like Putin off our throat. So our mission to become a clean energy superpower is about future-proofing energy supply, bringing energy bills down and protecting the planet that we all live on, doing right by our values and by our countries and our citizens. Because in this era, we must be the nation builders. We must be the patriots in our countries. We must show working people that we, and only we, can deliver the pride and belonging they seek. Their communities strong, cohesive, changed for the better, taking control of our future, tackling the big challenges, whether that's climate change or illegal migration, not shying away from them. That is how we win. That is how we rebuild. That's how renewal defeats grievance. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. I need the rest of our panel. Good to see you, Alba. Right.
Thank you so much. My name is Neera Tandon, and I'm the president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and we are so excited to co-host this day and really thrilled to be here with such incredible leaders from around the world. I want to thank Prime Minister Starmer for his words of inspiration and strength of resolve, and for being with us at the Global Progress Action Conference. And of course, it's my great honor to welcome Prime Ministers Mark Carney of Canada, Anthony Albanese of Australia, and Christian Frostadottir of Finland. Iceland. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh my God, that's so embarrassing. I'm thrilled to join you all for this conversation. We're living, and this is a really crucial moment because we are living in a new political moment. And as we all face rising authoritarianism and essentially significant disruption under the guise of change, we have leaders here who are addressing the challenges of their countries, people who are addressing the economic insecurities, addressing basic needs, meeting the moment without inducing fear, but inducing hope. And so as we face these challenges, we're thrilled to have these leaders here, and I'll just get right into the questions. Your respective electoral and policy victories. We have leaders here assembled who've all won election in the last year and a half. These have been points of inspiration for the progressive movement, for center-left parties, and for really democracy defenders around the world. And I'd love for you to share with us, how your messages, how that resonated, and how you are meeting the needs of your constituencies, people who are deeply concerned with cost of living and other issues. Mark Carney, please take it away. Mr. Prime Minister.
I see, that was introduction, discuss. Okay, so I will go. Thank you, Neera, thank you. This is fantastic to be at this gathering. So maybe I'll frame it a bit this way, which is,
our election and what Canadians were feeling, like in many electorates, but in a slightly different way, is a sense of loss of control. That's what happens when inflation is too high, and that's what happens when there is a sense that migration isn't being adequately managed. It's also what happened, and the most sharp version of this was, of course, the tariff relationship with the United States, when all of a sudden our largest trading partner was fundamentally changing the relationship. So our election and our policy was first and foremost, it was fight the tariffs, have a reaction. We had one of the strongest reactions. Protect our workers. So there were many ways we were doing that, but one of the things is we were taking all of the tariff revenue, putting it back into workers, helping workers retain their jobs, but also retrain, protect our communities against crime. But the core, pardon me, the core message was build. Pardon me, and it was to build and build in a positive way. You need a positive agenda, and it matters how we build. And I'll just leave you with a couple of core messages that ground our approach in the election, but very much in governing. First and foremost, we can give ourselves more than any foreign government can take away. So our ability to have one Canadian economy, we have a bunch of internal trade barriers, we're removing all of those. Our ability to build for the future new trade corridors, clean energy, artificial intelligence, diversify with partners, all of that is much greater than what could be taken away, even in the worst tariff scenario. So you have a positive element to that. The second thing that we emphasize is how we build. So we build as a nation. We build first and foremost thinking about workers. So the message to Canadians has been, we are going to create not hundreds of thousands of jobs, but hundreds of thousands of careers in the skilled trades and other skilled areas, and setting up in parallel with major projects and investments, apprenticeships, skilled training, so that Canadians are ready to take advantage of that. Last point, we have historic issues that are current issues in terms of reconciliation with Indigenous Canadians, Indigenous peoples, and the nature of the major investments we're doing is that there will always be Indigenous participation in the equity, in the ownership, in the building. So it's a progressive element, thinking back into workers and being inclusive with all groups in society, with a core positive message on build. People want and deserve that positive agenda, so it's not engaging on the turf of the more negative agenda, but focusing on the positive.
Thank you so much for that. We're going to return to the theme of rebuilding. But Prime Minister Albanese, in your time in office, you had a historic election, really one of the first times in a long time, re-elected. And how are you seeing this year? How are you meeting the needs of your constituents, of Australians, in this time of rapid change globally?
A big contrast in our campaign, I think, was we had a positive agenda. And there were two themes we kept going back to make a positive difference to people's lives. No one held back and no one left behind. So no one left behind, that a Labor government will always look after the vulnerable, will look after people on issues like gender equity. What we'd done was to, for example, real wages increasing. We've had, every year we've been in office, the minimum wage has been increased at a level at least or higher than inflation. So we've seen wages share of GDP go up for the first time in a long while, for example. We have, since the election, protected penalty rates. We have introduced superannuation to paid parental leave, and we're extending that out to 6 months paid parental leave. And we have that agenda in terms of equity, but no one held back is about aspiration as well. Progressive parties have to be the party of success as well. So engagement with business, engagement with job creation, new industries. How do we seize the opportunities from the clean energy transformation to create new industries, new jobs, as well as enhance blue-collar jobs which are there as well. So we have an agenda, a Future Made in Australia agenda, which is about value adding, not just digging things up, resources, which has been a traditional strength, and exporting them, but how do we value add in Australia, create those blue collar jobs, so it's connected up as well with skills and training and high value jobs to give people that opportunity. So that really is an overall theme around, and then we match that up with policies including particularly strengthening our healthcare system. Our Medicare system is very important. That was front and centre in the campaign. People trust us. They know that we are a party that believe in healthcare through just having your Medicare card, a universal health system. And our opponents really went back into grievance and we were able to point towards as well economic management. We produced 2 budget surpluses in our first term, the first time that had happened for a couple of decades. So we also emphasised the progressive patriotism idea as well, that we could go the Australian way. We didn't need to look to others for a pattern. We wanted to stand up for our own national interest, and that meant engagement in our region as well.
Thank you so much. We will also return to the discussion of progressive patriotism, but I wanted to ask you, Madam Prime Minister, in your time in office, how are you seeing meeting this moment for the people of Iceland?
So I guess it's different when you come into government having been in opposition before, because a big part of what you're doing, especially because since I took over the party, there was a big shift in sort of focus. We went back to core social democracy, focus on housing, economy, not trying to run after identity politics. But I mean, a core in our messaging coming into government is delivery relatively quickly. I mean, to be honest, I mean, the voter out there knows, they're smart, they understand that hard, structural changes, they take time. But there are moments, I think, where you can prove that you're there for the right reasons. I mean, we already put together a ministerial committee, for example, to revamp the building of nursing homes, and we just put people in a room and we didn't let them leave until they figured it out. And there were all these issues between the municipalities, between the government, between private companies, where somebody had got pissed off or something had got stuck in the system and they just allowed it to get that way. And so we managed to push that off and get that going pretty quickly. I will say we did also have a good moment, which I think really strengthened the government, which is that even though we campaigned on these bread and butter economic policy welfare issues, there has been a historical struggle in Iceland when it comes to our resources, especially our fisheries. We have a very profitable fisheries system, but the quota holders, they've retained much of the resource rents, and a large proportion of our citizens find this an unfair situation to be in. And so one of the first things we did was raise the resource rents, and we pushed for a new bill in Parliament, and we ended up getting filibustered by the opposition, not for days, but for weeks. And we stuck with it. And it led us to leave behind certain other things that we couldn't follow through on, but we stuck with it, and we ended up actually breaking up the filibuster with what some have called a nuclear button that we have in Parliament, but I would say is a democracy button, because the opposition is supposed to have an opinion, not to govern the country. And I think people thought we wouldn't do it. And it set an example that we were able to fulfill something in our first 6 months. So if you can deliver on a few things and people see that you have your heart in the right place and you're willing to go against that type of opposition, I think it gave a lot of people hope.
Prime Minister Starmer, thank you again for your remarks. And really, many countries around the world are facing a situation where there's a real rise of right-wing populism, and in some of the centrist parties, even centrist right parties, are kind of falling away. In this context, how does the center left, how do progressives meet the moment and actually capture a strong majority?
Well, I think for us, the context, certainly for the last election, was an electorate, a public, who, since the 2008 crash, hadn't seen their living wages, their living standards rise for many, many years, totally flat. Their public services had got worse and worse to the point of decimation. And there'd been a massive drop-off in trust in politics for a whole bunch of reasons. So this led to quite a strong sense of disenchantment. And if you think about the 2008 crash to last year, that's 16 years. So anyone who was maybe in their 20s, late 20s, would have gone through to their early 40s not feeling they were materially progressing in the way that they would have expected in their lives, not seeing their public services fit for purpose, and losing faith in politics as an answer to that. That's why the change slogan that we had at the election was so powerful, because people said, I want that to change, I want to break this cycle. And therefore what we're trying to do is to come in, and what I was alluding to earlier, this national renewal, is not just about fixing the problems, somehow taking them back to where we were, pre-08, pre-2010, whatever it may be, but building something better and different as you renew. So to take an example, our economy hasn't grown materially since 08, it's been flat-lining. We need to get economic growth. That is the #1 mission of the government. But it's got to be growth that is felt in every part of the country. It can't be a line on a graph, and it can't be growth in some parts of the country. It's got to be in every single part, which is why we've worked really hard on things like inward investment, record inward investment in the first year of the Labour government, and then a big top-up last week with the US state visit. But that has to be identified as to the places it's going in, to Hartlepool, into the various different, the Clyde. It's got to be place-based, and people need to see it's in my region, economic growth everywhere. Because I think for progressives, for social democrats, we for too long lost our way. We thought that redistribution was the only thing that mattered for fairness. You create wealth and then you redistribute, and that's a one-word answer for too many of our communities. It isn't. They want the pride to stand on their own 2 feet. They want the wealth to be in their community. The stuff we did yesterday in Pride in Place is really important, because what we said there was, here's a pot of money for your place, because frankly, you've been overlooked for too long, and you will decide what that money is spent on. So you're not coming cap in hand to Whitehall for somebody in Whitehall to tell you. It's your decision. Same with our public services. We've got to rebuild our National Health Service, would be the touchstone for us. But we can't simply take it back to where it was. It's got to be an NHS fit for the future. It's got to change as we go forward. So there's this question of how you deliver and what renewal means in substance. And then the other part, which is really important, is that certainly in the UK now, we're at a crossroads. We have got a right-wing proposition that we've not had in this country before. We've gone on for decades with elections which are basically either a Labour government or a Conservative government, pitched usually pretty much on the centrepiece of politics, the centre ground of politics. So, but now we face a very different proposition with Reform and Nigel Farage, and so the battle of our times is between patriotic national renewal, in the way I've described under a Labour government, which is capable of expressing who and what we are as a country accurately and in a way where people feel they're valued and they belong, and that we can actually move forward together, versus something which is turning into a toxic divide. That march that we had here 2 weeks ago in London, in Whitehall, that sent shivers through the spines of many of our communities well away from London, not just those in the immediate vicinity. So there's a battle for the soul of this country now as to what sort of country do we want to be, because That toxic divide, that decline with reform, it's built on a sense of grievance politics, identifying something real for sure, but relying on the problem existing in order for their politics to persist. And it's a very different choice. The choice before the electorate here at the next election is not going to be the traditional Labour versus Conservative. It's why I've said the Conservative Party is dead. Centre-right parties in many European countries have withered on the vine, and the same is happening in this country. It's a different proposition, and therefore it becomes a binary argument as to the future of our country, and it actually becomes bigger than Labour. It's about all of those that genuinely believe in the patriotism that I think is the heart of what we are as a country. So for us, it's about battling with repairing the damage that was done under the last government, which was huge, but rebuilding in a way which embraces and takes on the battle for the soul of the country, because we're going to face a very different election next time to any of the elections we fought in the United Kingdom for a very, very long time. And we need to be, that's why I think, certainly why I want this to be out as an open fight now between Labour and Reform. And I'll be majoring on this on my conference speech next week.
Thank you so much for that. Just to build on that, on those comments, Prime Minister Albanese, you referenced this a little bit, but I think what the Prime Minister Starmer is talking about is conservative parties or far-right parties are offering a significant level of disruption, a significant change, and then we have to be drivers of an alternative, not basically go back to the status quo, but really drive an alternative vision of change. It seems like your election, you were able to do that by really having enough trust with voters. But how do you deal with that sort of competition of ideas, and how are you doing that now?
I think one of the things that you've got to say is that change happens, and get that across, not pretend that things can just stay the same. But the governments have a role in shaping change, otherwise change will shape the country without agency, if you like. And you've got to bring people with you on that journey of change. So climate change is front and centre. Our opposition at the moment are going back into a debate over whether it exists or not, basically, over whether they'll continue to support net zero by 2050. And we're saying climate change is real. This is how you have to act. Get ahead of it and bring people with you on that journey, I think is really important. I think also that you need trust. My party and our Conservatives had both replaced sitting Prime Ministers a number of times, and that disruption annoyed people. People were like, what's the system? So one of the things that we did at the same time was to produce, I think, a stable government going forward as well, and to have the first time we've had a PM re-elected for over 2 decades. There have been 7 different results from 7 different elections. And so able to say that trust and to fulfil the commitments. So we were very disciplined about doing what we said we would do. There was one exception, which was we changed tax cuts that were built in to deliver for lower middle income earners, and we said we needed to do that. We owned it. I went to our National Press Club and said, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, because of the pressures that were on cost of living. So we were relentless about bringing things back to cost of living pressures, which was a global phenomenon. Global inflation was there as well. So, you know, had a 6 in front when we were elected and rose to 7, and we have now got it down within the band of with a 2 in front. And we did that without sacrificing people, and we did that as a distinction. So employment's strong, over 1 million jobs created in our system, unemployment's 4.2, and real wages increasing. So we said, you know, we'll get inflation down, but in a way that doesn't leave people behind. And we, since the election, in May, we've been really ruthless as well about delivering on the things that we took to the election so that we could, again, fulfil that trust that people want to see. So we've cut student debt, increased paid parental leave, an increase in the minimum wage, paid prac for people studying to be nurses or teachers. We've done energy bill relief, a whole range of changes that we said we would do, we took to the election, and we've implemented, most of them, those cost of living measures in the first period, because that's what people want. If you can't relate it back to making a difference to people's lives, then some of the culture war issues and those things can come to the fore. Our opponents are going down those rabbit holes, and I think they're a cul-de-sac. They don't actually lead anywhere. Whereas if you are ruthlessly concentrating on making a difference to people's lives that they can see, then you can talk about the broader issues as well, that you might want to talk about, those longer term changes of equity and broader issues about Australia's place in the world and those issues.
Prime Minister Carney, you face special circumstances in Canada, given your neighbour to the south, and let me just apologize. And so how are you, just building on the Prime Minister's remarks about delivering and how delivery creates trust, how do you see that in the context of Canada?
Yeah, well, we all have special circumstances in our own way, I suppose. So, and I'm going to pick up what Prime Minister Albanese just said. It starts with delivering directly for the situation people are in, and and also draw a bit on what Keir was saying, which is, the reality of what you inherited, going 15 years without real wages, without people getting ahead. Like the last time that happened was the middle of the 19th century. Karl Marx was writing the Communist Manifesto in the British Library. I mean, there's a connection here. So you've got to deliver real wage growth first and foremost. And so similar to in Australia, slightly different measures. First thing we did is we cut taxes for the middle class. We cut taxes for 22 million Canadians, boom, right away. First thing we did, we cut a tax for effectively for young Canadians when they're buying their first time home, cut taxes on carbon, which was also the direct carbon tax, which had become a divisive issue. It was in textbook a good policy, but a divisive issue. So very tangible things that directly affected affordability, cost of living. Those are fiscal choices, but they had to be made, and they're delivering, and Canadians are beginning to feel first that. Second, building in a way that is as inclusive as possible. I'm going to give another example, which is we need to double the pace of home building in Canada. Okay, there's lots of ways you can try to do that, but the core, we're starting from the deeply affordable end of the spectrum and building on out with some interventions from government, but driving through the private sector. The point on this is it's by Canadian, so it's Canadian technology, Canadian lumber, which America is keeping out for the moment, he says, hopefully, and Canadian technology factory built and other aspects of that. But it's an affordability point. It's progressive in its approach because it is lower carbon in construction, it's lower carbon in operation, it's cheaper, and it fills a housing need for half of our households that we're just simply not being addressed. So all of what I've said has actually nothing to do with U.S. tariff policy, and it goes back to something I said earlier, and we say over and over again. We have learned the lesson that we need to be, we use the expression, masters in our own home. We were over-reliant on one trading partner. We can address it by building at home and diversifying, we'll get to it, I'm sure, with like-minded trading partners around the world. That's not everybody in the world, but countries that share our values, share a commitment to open markets, And again, that can more than compensate for what's happening elsewhere. And the key thing is it gives people agency. We're in charge. We're not reliant on a decision that's taken outside our border.
Madam Prime Minister, you just gave us an extremely concrete example of delivering. And I just wonder if you wanted to offer more ideas about rebuilding that sense of social trust and by delivering, and how you have a different ethos in government than your predecessors.
So there was a big change in government when we took over, because this is the second time in history where the Conservatives are not the biggest party. And the last time when the Social Democrats were in government, it was after the crisis. It was a very difficult time, so sort of the room for renewal or policy drive was very limited. And so there was a big mandate for change, but at the same time, I think there was still this sense of disbelief that a Social Democratic Party could sort of have control of the economy, do things properly. So one of the first things that we did was to make sure that people knew that we were taking the economy very seriously. We put on a new fiscal rule, which excluded investment, and said, okay, there are limits to how much, fiscal can grow. Mark likes this. We've discussed this. We discussed this, yeah. Yeah, we're gonna be balancing the budget. We're gonna be balancing the budget by 2027. And we started out by asking for ideas from the public on tidying up ideas. How do you tidy up with the government? And a big part of that is, it might sound like it's for show, but at the end of the day, a big driver of distrust, I think, in politics today, and I feel this especially because I didn't grow up in politics, I'm relatively new in all of this, is that people just feel like they're not listened to, like their ideas aren't good, and most of the times they have pretty good ideas. And so we collected all these ideas, and it was also a signal to the public that we, despite being a center-left-led government, we like the government, we like systems, we support welfare. We're not watchdogs of the system. It's not, the right tends to say the government is in our way, it needs to be broken down. We would say, okay, there are parts of it that need to be disrupted. And so we're okay by going into systems change, by talking about tidying up, doing things better, even though we might be wanting to spend more on welfare. And I think that gave us an aura of sort of cleaning up in a way. There's 3 women who are in this coalition, so like the leaders of all the parties are women. And we just have this aura of taking care of business. And I think it's really given us a good platform of then doing all sort of the progressive ideas that we need to do in housing and welfare, because we have ownership of what we're doing. So this has been a big focus of us. I also want to say, for example, when it comes to building, Iceland is an energy-rich country, but one thing you might not know is that over the past couple of years, or even a decade, there's been this backlash against power, against harnessing nature. And even in my party, we have people who want to conserve nature. I want to conserve nature. It's very important, but there needs to be a balance between ramping up, building up, getting growth. And we've been very critical of the regulations that have been set that we feel like is not promotive to growth. So we're doing these little small things that show that we're not just there to spend everybody's money. But at the same time, we have a righteousness check, like we did with the fisheries. We're hitting back on the fisheries fees. We're getting income in, we're getting taxes in, and we're not just focusing on cutting. So I think that's definitely given us a lot of trust. And then I will just say at the end of the day, people vote for you to govern, to make difficult decisions. They don't want to always hear that everything you're doing is easy, that they appreciate it. If you say no to some things, and then you say, this is going to be difficult for a year or 2, but I'm sure it's going to be better, because it gives you trust. So we've been pretty clear on that this is a longer-term project, and I think it's given us credibility, at least for now. Let's see what happens in a year or so.
I just want to pick up on some of what Mark was saying, because on the one hand, we've got the domestic situation here in the UK, as I described, a different political divide that's opened up. But that's happening at the same time as much more instability and conflict around the world. The global situation is as fragile as I think many of us have known it. I have to say, when the Berlin Wall came down, I didn't think that I'd see Russian tanks going across European borders in my lifetime. I really didn't. I mean, yet we've seen it. That conflict is not just about the sovereignty of Ukraine. It is about the ambition of Putin and our values, our freedoms. It's already impacted hugely on energy prices, etc., here in the United Kingdom. And it has shattered the idea that the comfortable peace dividend that we have enjoyed for years is here necessarily to stay, and therefore we have to rise to this moment. And on security and defence, we're in a different era. There is no doubt about that. You can feel that all across Europe and beyond. Countries are spending more on defence. And we have set up the Coalition of the Willing. That is a group of like-minded countries focused in the first instance on how do we provide the security that will be needed if there's a ceasefire in Ukraine, but equally, and really important for me, as a vehicle to ensure that the countries in the Coalition of the Willing, particularly the European countries, step up on defence and security in a way we haven't. Because for years we've pretty well neglected this. We haven't been in the right place. We've assumed that the peace dividend would last for much longer. And now we've got to step up into that space. And so Coalition of the Willing, for me, is about, yes, Ukraine, but it's about a bigger argument about how we step up on defence and security in this new era. And we have to combine this with what's going on at home. So at home, you've got the how do you deliver on the real things that matter to people day in, day out, whilst at the same time attending to the international issues, which are huge. And going back to Mark's point, it's not just defence and security. Trade and the economy in our world is changing. It's moving to a different place. You can have your own view on tariffs. You may think they're good, bad, or indifferent, but the fact is they're here. President Trump believes in them, uses them, and we have to understand that. It's a profound belief that he has about the way he wants his economy to be reshaped. You know, we can commentate on that, or we can understand we're living in a different world, and therefore we have to react to that, which means being much clearer about, in my view, the role of the state in our own countries, working with our industries, our sectors, so that it's not just a sort of free-for-all, market knows best, but actually much more focused and directed, but also how do we lower trade inhibitors across like-minded countries, which is why we've pushed so hard to get our trade deal with the US, particularly on relation to tariffs on things that matter to this country. Car manufacturing will be the best example of that, but also the trade deal that we did with India, which had been tried for many years, and moving closer to the EU through the EU-UK reset, is part of re-establishing the UK on the world stage, which we had to do. It's very important, but is also recognising on defence and security and on trade and the economy, we are living in a different, much more difficult world than the world we were living in just a few years ago. And therefore, you've got the remaking of domestic politics in a world where on defence and security and trade and the economy, we are in a new era. And bringing that together is hugely important. Not easy, because there's always this tension as to what happens internationally versus what happens at home. I have to say, I don't think we've been in a time where the domestic impact of what's happening internationally has been as profound and as direct as it is at the moment. What happens in the rest of the world is having a direct impact on the United Kingdom in a way that wasn't the case, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years ago. And it is It's a very profound challenge that we all face, which is why it's important to have gatherings like this, where we can come, share our experience, exchange our thoughts, and ask the question, how does social democracy respond to some of this?
For Mr. Carney, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I'll just add to that very quickly. You know, our core policy, our core message in the election campaign, our core policy now is, it's called Canada Strong. Okay, we're building Canada strong in a variety of ways. And our foreign policy, to link it to foreign policy, has traditionally been a value-based foreign policy. Okay, we're realizing that it's not just the strength of our values, but the value of our strength. And how do we build that strength? It's making choices at home in terms of defense and security, and it's marrying that strength with like-minded partners. And what we're living through, all of us, what we're living through is not a transition, it's a rupture. It's a big change in the trading system, and we're not going back. Nostalgia is not a strategy there. Big change in geopolitical risk. We have agency, but we have to build strength at home, find those like-minded partners, bring together. And in doing so, we deliver for our citizens, but also it gives a confidence and a purpose to the country that is empowering.
And I think that speaks to the patriotism that you talked about. So just as we're closing, we have a few more words from Minister Albanese about the topic you mentioned, which is progressive patriotism.
Yeah, that we, I think on the range of issues, be it trade, that means standing up for, in our case, Australia's national interest. We're also aiming to diversify our trade interests, and from us, the driver of that in part was that there were restrictions from China, our major trading partner, so we've reached out particularly to ASEAN, to the growing economies to our north, but also the other partnerships that we have as well. Migration is a big issue. When it comes to migration issues, one of the theme of our approach is you can be strong on borders without being weak on humanity. So we have strong border controls through Operation Sovereign Borders. We've continued, but at the same time we've increased the number of asylum seekers who we take. We abolished temporary protection visas to give people that security to fully participate in society. People who'd been in Australia some for more than a decade. They weren't going back anywhere, but to really emphasise that Australian values are there. I think there are attempts by some on the far right to own nationalism, and so it's a matter of not being nativist about it, but being proud of who we are and what we're achieving. And Australian society has the oldest continuous culture on earth in First Nations people, but we also are a multicultural society as well, who've welcomed people from all over the world. We're all either migrants or descendants of migrants, except for First Nations people. So we have a Prime Minister called Albanese and a Senate leader called Wong. And that's who we are as a modern society. And I think that is really important as well, that we're embracing who we are and being proud of it.
And just finally, Madam Prime Minister, as you see this conversation, how do you see this idea of sort of progressive patriotism?
I mean, speaking for Iceland at least, I mean, can you imagine? If you're an Icelandic person, you have to be proud. You're there in the middle of the ocean and you're your own country. Icelanders are very proud. And we have this strange relationship with the outside world because we're so addicted to it, but at the same time, you know, we have our own language. We've done really well for ourselves, despite a lot of reasons why we may not have. I mean, what I will say is that you get really far ahead when it comes to trying to unite people behind, whether it's the flag or patriotism or the nation, by showing people respect. And I do think, and I'm sure everyone here in this room can agree, that center-left social democracy for some time, starting having a conversation too much up here. They were talking at people, not with them. They weren't talking about concrete matters. And what is patriotic is meeting people where they're at, understanding that your mandate comes from the people, that you're not supposed to tell people how they feel, but you're supposed to experience how they feel and try to run based on that. And so, to me, patriotism has meant trying to join the country together, all of Iceland, not just urban-centric, very globalist mindset, even though it's very important that we have international relationships. We just need to be able to get to a level where we're having real conversations with people. And at the end of the day, people want togetherness, they want humanity, they want to be kind to their neighbor, but they just want the systems to work. So they want you to go to work and disrupt those systems if they need to work. You don't even have to talk that much about it, just do it. And you know, at the end of the day, that's what we're all gonna be measured on. Are we building those nursing homes? Did those house builds go up? Do you have health care? It's not just the rhetoric. So again, we'll see where we're at in a couple of years, but I think we can do it.
Right. Just do it is a great motto for how democracies can deliver. I want to thank this incredible panel, and I have to say, the future is bright when you have leaders who are focused on delivering. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I think we are going.
Well, don't run away just yet. We're on to our next panel, which is about meeting the moment. Sounds good on a summit stage, meeting the moment, but meeting it with what exactly? People do not want slogans, they want proof. And that's what this panel will explore if you do stay with us. So on the stage now, we'll have Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, USA, a Democratic governor who has made state-level progressive leadership central to America's political debate. We'll also have Magdalena Andersson, the former Prime Minister of Sweden, who steered her country through crisis, and moderating we'll have Elly Schlein, leader of Italy's Democratic Party and Member of Parliament. But do stay with us as they join the stage now.
So we should have. Okay, we can start. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here and to be with GB. I'm Elly Schlein, the leader of the Partito Democratico in Italy, opposition party right now, with an extreme right government of Giorgia Meloni.
And I suppose I'm Governor J.B. Pritzker, and I'm in the opposition party, but not in my state. I am the governor.
So it's particularly important to be here on stage after three prime ministers that I must thank for their leadership in these days, also in New York, on Palestine, and I thank them for the strength that they have shown in that discussion. In Italy, we are worried about the international situation, GB, and I wanted to ask you to start off, what is your position on how Trump is dealing with the historical friendship between the European Union and the US? I mean, we must not give up our transatlantic alliance and friendship, even now when Trump started a commercial war towards our countries and towards the European Union that is damaging strongly our economies. So what is your position on this, on what Trump is doing with the historical partners and allies?
Well, my observation is that the challenges that the Trump administration has brought to the transatlantic alliance are multi-faceted. Let's start with the economic relationships and then move to the defense relationships. And we cannot afford to lose either one. Our relationship from a defense perspective has been, I think, severely impacted by the shifting sands of the United States engagement in the Ukraine-Russia war. It was my understanding and my belief that the United States should stand in solidarity with a country whose borders have been invaded, and that our advocacy should be for a democracy that is being put to the test by a rival, indeed an enemy of the United States. And it is thoroughly unusual in my lifetime to see a kind of shift in policy that has occurred nearly immediately with regard to a war in which we had an ally, in which we were supporting an ally, and now we have essentially abandoned that ally. I say that in the context of a broader transatlantic relationship because obviously our view of the war between Ukraine and Russia is really about preserving the democracies and the protection of and the defense of Europe writ large. And we all know that Vladimir Putin has designs that are much further than just Ukraine. And if he's allowed to hold territory or even advance further in Ukraine, it's an admission that we're okay with his his expansionist policies. So I worry a lot from a defense perspective about what the transatlantic relationship is now as a result of the change in that policy, not to mention Trump's attitude toward NATO, which we could talk about, how much defense spending Europe should be putting forward, and that's all worthy of some debate and discussion, but it is challenging from my perspective for that continued defense relationship. The economic relationship, bewilders me. I do not understand why Donald Trump has taken it upon himself to put tariffs across the board. We're believers, I'm a believer, that tariffs are okay if you're working on getting a trading partner to drop some tariff or some barrier that exists, and that you need to counter that existing economic relationship in order to, again, bring down barriers. Trade is good in general for multiple countries to be doing with one another. Tariffs impede that trade. They raise prices. In the United States, they've raised prices significantly for working class and middle class people. So I'm worried a lot about how the relationship between the United States and Europe in particular has been affected by those two big policy changes from this administration.
Well, the damage is huge. I'll take as example our country. You know that Italy has an economy with a strong vocation in exports. And according to the figures, we might lose next year more than 20 billion in exports. And it might put at risk up to 100,000 jobs. So you can understand the strong impact that this decision, coming from an ally, is having on our economy right now, without the Italian government saying what they would do to support our economy, our enterprises, our workers and businesses. So we are in a tough situation in which obviously it was shocking, no? And you can see also from the, let's say, from the polls that this was shocking coming from the US and the US president in our country, in our debate. But we have to react as European Union. We know that we should invest more in our strategic autonomy. That's why we think we have to go further in our European integration. And even more than that, in the relation with the UK, where we are, to do something together, to plan common investments at the European level, because otherwise we could not compete. For example, think about artificial intelligence. The US are investing hundreds of billions in research and innovation. And the same is doing China on the other side. So we still have to work on strategic autonomy of the European Union, common investment in these very important matters. But we must not give up, I will insist, our relationship, even with a president that is attacking us, as he did in the UN General Assembly just a couple of days ago. So it's quite shocking, because he appears to be attacking the closest allies and friends that the EU has had in the European Union, and not only. We had here before the Prime Minister of Australia, Canada, other countries that were particularly hit by tariffs. But we have, I think, to insist on something else. Why are they winning, JB? In my country and in your country, I see similarities. They work on the same agenda. The extreme right are using the same enemies every day. They need enemies, because they are not delivering. And they pick every day the same enemies: migrants, LGBTQI communities, emancipated women, but also journalists, judges, the opposition, because they have to distract also the opinion from the fact that in the first 100 executive orders of President Trump, there was nothing on the health care of Americans. There was nothing on wages of the American. And at the same time, in Italy, our Prime Minister has cut the public health system, has cut 6,000 teachers from public schools, and is blocking our proposal of the oppositions on a minimum wage in a country that has among the lowest wages in Europe. So I think we can beat them, but in order to beat them, we must not run after their agenda. We must have our progressive agenda, talking about the problems that everyday citizens are facing. And if we push them and force them to the ground where they are feeling most uncomfortable, which is social justice, if we do that, I think that we might again win against them. Because I don't know what you think happened in the last election, and I'm interested in understanding better what happened according to you. I think that the living conditions and inflation, for example, had a role in that election.
Yes.
But I think that tariffs and the lack of political will of this extreme right wing to address the living condition of our population, again, will put us in a position where we can set high in the agenda social justice. What do you think?
Well, the simple fact is that Donald Trump won the last election with a series of lies, and now we are 8 months into his administration, and many people among the American public who voted for him have seen that he was lying. He said, for example, that he would end the war in Gaza, that he would end the war in Ukraine immediately. He said day one. He said he would lower prices in the United States day one. And forget about whether he could do it day one or not. We're 8 months in, and all of those things got worse. All of the things, and I only mentioned 3, but for the average voter in the United States anyway, the fact that going to the grocery store is still quite expensive, and prices continue to go up, and he's done nothing. Indeed, he's added to the burden, because tariffs are a tax on the American people. And so there is, I think, a growing understanding that the prevarications of his campaign are just that. Now, I don't want to go back and debate about why Democrats lost and Republicans won in the 2024 elections, except to understand today that looking forward, we can't let them continue to lie and not have a response that calls it out. And every day that goes on, at least in the United States, I do not think that talking about you know, the social justice issues is the #1 thing that's affecting people's votes in the 2026 elections. I think it's literally their living conditions, their ability to buy a house or rent an apartment, their ability to get to work and get home in a timely fashion, their ability to buy what they need at a grocery store, the price of beer, the price of tomatoes, the price of beef, everything, you know, eggs and so on has all gone up, and people voted for him because they thought that Democrats had caused that to happen and that this guy was promising to make that better. Those are the things that if we're going to win elections, and I would say the same thing to you, that we have to not only have policies about, but at least at the local and state level in the United States, we have to deliver. And we've tried to do that in Illinois, just as an example, in 2 ways. One is that we raised the minimum wage for workers in Illinois from the federal minimum wage in the United States is $7.25. That's about, what, £5 here in Great Britain per hour. We raised our minimum wage to almost double that. So a little over, I guess it would be more than £10, $15. And that's one way in which, frankly, you can address inflation and the cost of living. The other, of course, is to try to actually lower prices. And I can't control the broader economy and the cost of goods generally, but we eliminated the grocery tax. We had a tax on sales at grocery stores. We eliminated that in Illinois. And I do not think, I mean, those of us on the center left should avoid talking about where we can cut taxes, particularly for working class people. If we can lower costs and lower prices for people, that's what we ought to be going after. And then you mentioned healthcare. And I want to say that if we do not have a relentless campaign to get in the United States, and I know many of you are beyond us in this, but in the United States, a relentless campaign toward universal health care. So there's not a single person in our country who does not have the ability to go see a doctor. Then we're doing it wrong. We should be doing that every day. So look, we lose focus, and I think this should be said. I've heard this anyway from many of you engaged in political parties across Europe, that we lose focus sometimes on the things that really matter and let the right grab something really small and turn it into an enormous cultural question. And instead of pushing that aside and refocusing everybody on wages and jobs and healthcare and the cost of living, that we get tangled up in that, and somehow that's what we end up talking about the day before the election and the week before and 2 weeks before the election. We have to, frankly, play the game better. We're not doing that well in the United States. I watched as our leaders in the last election got tangled up in that. I mean, I was out on the campaign trail advocating for my candidate for president, and talking about what I thought were the really important things to people in their everyday lives. And somehow that was not the topic that was really being talked about on national television across the United States. So I would suggest to you that we have a lot of work to do within our separate countries in making sure that we're focused and not letting them lie over and over again without being called out on it, and making sure that our media is calling them out on it.
Sure, it's not easy because you know that they are getting control. They now can put together an unprecedented concentration of power, means, data, and resources as well. In my country, the government basically controls the public television, and they got rid of dissenting voices, and they control the most part of the private television, still the ones of the Berlusconi family. So it's not hard to do what you said, which is telling the truth and trying also to set the agenda every day, discussing the concrete issues that interest our people.
But let's also recognize that when we talk about media, the landscape, I mean, when I ran for office in 2017 and 2018, when I ran for governor, what is that, 6.5 years ago, 7 years ago, but just in that short period of time, the focus of media and where you're going to get your audience and who's listening and how has changed drastically. It had already changed in 2018 from, let's say, the 2012 election when Barack Obama was running for re-election. But now, I mean, you can almost, I'm not going to suggest that we do this, but you can almost ignore broadcast television and entirely run a campaign of ideas and media on other channels, right? On Facebook, on Instagram, on lots of other platforms. And we should be focused on that in the way that, at least in the United States, the right is focused on that. That they decided that even Fox News, which I think is wrong on so many levels, that even Fox News is not a great channel for getting your message out, that there are so many other ways to do that. We don't do it as well as the Republicans. We haven't historically. And we need to not only create more channels, do better in terms of having more outlets that are at least fair, but also that those of us who are in public life and who are speaking to the public are going to those programs that people are watching. I mean, in the millions now, people that you never heard of 3 years ago are now having their own programs that are listened to and watched because of people's deep concerns. And particularly, people have deep concerns who are at least on media about what I would just broadly say is, challenges to democracy in the United States. And so even though I do not think, and I've said this many times, that if you knocked on 100 doors, and as somebody who's run for office, I've knocked on a lot of doors to ask people if they would vote for me or for somebody I was advocating for. If you knocked on 100 doors and said to all 100 of them, the number one issue facing the United States is democracy, or facing the United States in the world is promotion of democracy, democracy does not rank with 95 out of 100 people that you would talk to at the doors. 5 people will tell you, yes, this is the most important thing, my God, what are we going to do? And 95 people will tell you, I can't afford to buy a house, or I can't afford to keep my apartment, or I can't afford groceries. And so it's very important that we are talking about those issues, but we cannot ignore also going on social media, being on podcasts, talking about democracy while we're also talking about what the failure of democracy does to your pocketbook.
So new means to discuss about basic needs of people. And I agree, I mean, that's what we see every day. Our government lies by saying that they've done the biggest investments in the history of the country on the public health system. But you know that it's not counted in absolute terms. It's counted in every country of the world in, let's say, referring to the GDP of the country. And if you look at that figure, it's been, declining and going down since they are in government. And when we were in the parliament showing this figure, I mean, literally showing it on a page, it went viral on social media. With more than 8 million views. So it means that we have a way to talk about what people are worried about. Healthcare is #1 worry for all Italians and also people who have voted for the right wing. So I agree that we have to focus our agenda on the basic needs of people. But my question would be, as you mentioned before, I know that you are also coordinating with other governors on what you can do to react to what is happening in the US with the Trump administration, but also what you can concretely do to deliver. And I'll tell you a couple of examples because we are in a different situation. We have regions, we don't have states, but we rule in some regions and we rule in most of the municipalities as Partito Democratico in Italy. And our mayors are trying to do their best to react. For example, by making kindergartens for children education free for families, because this is a concrete help. And by the way, it's very, let's see, embarrassing to have to underline this in front of the first female president of our country. But when they cut off the public health system and when they cut off funds for our local administration on welfare, Giorgia Meloni knows exactly what happens in Italy. All the care work lies on the shoulders of the families, but in the families, particularly on the shoulders of women. And it's one of the reasons why we have the women employment rates that are the lowest in Europe in the south of my country. So investing in children education by our local administration means both combating inequalities and children poverty and poverty in education from the very beginning of their lives, but it means also supporting families and, in a way, redistributing the care work in the families, which also help fathers to stay more with their children. So we are doing a number of issues at the local level, but I'm interested in what can you do to defend and fill the gaps of what the Trump administration is not doing to support the communities in your states?
Well, I would start with the challenge that I think we all face. People's trust in government broadly has declined significantly. There are a variety of reasons for that. I mean, at least in the United States, there's one party that constantly denigrates government and just, you know, as far as they're concerned, everything about government is wrong until, of course, some of their voters need some of it. And then the other party, the problem for Democrats is we've got to make sure, in order to win elections, in order for people to believe in what we believe in, which is lifting up the middle class, lifting up working families, standing up for the most vulnerable, is we've got to actually deliver for them. It can't be talk. It's got to be something that they actually received. And you talked about education. I think this is vitally important. In the state of Illinois, so by the way, I have a button that I wear a lot and I hand out and lots of people wear around Illinois that says, Democrats deliver. And it's because what voters really want is the delivery of, not talk, not discussion about, but actually deliver on it. And here's the thing I want to say about education. We did not have universal preschool. We have universal kindergarten in Illinois, but we do not have universal preschool. So that would be, at least in the US, that would be 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds. We did not have universal coverage. Indeed, I would say it was woefully deficient. And so we actually put a program together, and it's something I've worked on for more than 20 years before I was governor. And I sort of jumped from being an advocate and an activist for it to being in charge of the government that has to deliver it. So we've actually put in place a plan that by 2027, and we've been delivering on it, getting universal preschool for 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds. That delivery is important for people to have faith in, because it is true that if you ask many families, particularly young families, what they need most, it's childcare, and inexpensive childcare. It's way too expensive in the United States. And so providing childcare and preschool, which is what we're focused on, is delivering for people. So that delivery, and the fact that we raised the minimum wage is real delivery, has meant that Democrats, at least in Illinois, are doing better than before, not worse. And that, to me, is what's missing, is what you were describing, what local governments, in our case, state government and local governments, are delivering. What we deliver actually matters toward whether Democrats and the center-left win or not. And you know, all talk, no action doesn't get you anywhere. Actually making sure that people's lives are getting better is what really matters. And so I'm deeply concerned, though, when I think about what the right is doing across Europe, too. The idea is, let's make government the enemy. Let's make delivery of services the enemy. Let's make it seem like they're invading your privacy by delivering for you. In the United States, the argument against preschool and against childcare is they're interfering with the parent-child relationship. Government is interfering between your relationship, between parents and children. And I mean, I literally scratch my head when I hear this. It's optional. You don't have to take advantage of universal preschool or childcare. It's optional for you, but boy, a whole lot of people who, two-income families where both parents have to go work, need childcare that's affordable and can't do it if childcare costs as much as one or the other of the parent is earning. Then that person should just stay home and take care of the child. So I really think that we're responsible for our own futures as center-left advocates if we are delivering or not delivering. That is what matters, because it's so easy to be on the other side where you're just railing against government all the time. That sounds so great. Let's cut taxes. Let's, the government doesn't work anyway. Let's just get rid of it. That's great until you actually need it, and it's not there.
And see how important it is. I mean, we met today for the first time, but you see that we are fighting for the same vision of the future of our communities based on the basic needs. The priorities that we have been setting in the discussion in Italy is healthcare, because everybody needs healthcare, because we are a population that is getting older and we have to manage it, to deal with it. Public schools, starting from children care, because it cannot be just a privilege for people who can afford it. It has to be a universal right for every child that wants to get it. And also decent jobs and decent wages, which is important because in my country, there are so many young people that when they are facing, let's say, precarious jobs and contracts and wages that are so low, are leaving to other countries, are leaving from the south to the north. And what they are asking us as a progressive force is to establish their right to stay where they want to stay. And sometimes there is a lack of opportunity on this. But I know that you have also pushed a lot on innovation and supporting new startups of young people by supporting their ideas. So again, industrial policy is important because the right wing is completely forgetting what it means to create new jobs.
Well, Ellie, this is a question I want to put to you, and maybe people in the audience will see this as a bit of a debate that goes on the left, which is, what do you think about the emphasis or lack of emphasis that exists among all of us on the center left about job creation? Yeah. In other words, a lot of what we often talk about are social issues. They're about delivery of services, about healthcare, but we don't often talk about, or not often enough in my view, the creation of jobs. What are we doing to help build businesses up so there are more jobs? And I guess I'll ask that to you. How do you view that? And in Italy, how is that viewed more broadly by the center left and the left?
Well, in Italy, what we are suggesting and we're doing, delivering with our regional administration and local administration, is to plan, to program, to listen to their needs and try to put in place also public policy that helps in innovating, doing research. Our economy is based mostly on small, medium, and micro enterprises that do not have the size to do alone research and development. So there's room for public policy, also by using European funds, to support innovation, to support, for example, circular economy, because when it comes to how do you deal with climate change, it can be an opportunity with the right kind of policy. I heard the discussion before. Clean energy is an opportunity. In a country like this, where we have the highest energy bills across the European Union, our enterprises, the first thing they ask us is to intervene to reduce energy costs, because like this, they lose competitiveness towards all the other actors. And there are things that can be done immediately following the example of Pedro Sanchez in Spain, and I know he's about to come, so we'll have to leave very soon, but also Portugal. Why is our government not decoupling the price of energy from the price of gas? Because they do not want to touch the extra profits made by a bunch of big energy companies against all the other companies and families in our country. So there are ways in which we have to be there to say we are here to help to create new jobs, but the point is new quality jobs, not precarious jobs and not exploitation of jobs, because we have to put at the core the dignity of who works in our countries. I think that our time is up, but I want to thank you all for the attention and thank GB for this great opportunity.
Thank you.
And I will conclude by saying we must not leave internationalism to the nationalists. It's good to know that we're fighting the same fights, and let's strengthen each other by showing that we are a real family of progressive and that we, together, we can deliver more. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, really.
That was another insightful discussion. Do stay with us before we do head off for lunch. I think I was a bit excited earlier, and he can blame me because I introduced the party leader of the Swedish Social Democrats, Magdalena Andersson, who will be in conversation with me right now. She's known by some in Sweden as the bulldozer, and I'm sure you'll find her less terrifying than her nickname suggests. So please do welcome Magdalena Andersson to the stage, please. Thank you so much for joining me, Magdalena. I would just like to highlight that we are living in really turbulent times, as you know, and the war in Europe, global instability, voters are feeling really discontent. From your perspective, how should progressive parties face this moment? How do you give people both security and a sense of community?
Well, thank you. I mean, we do live in, as you say, very, very difficult times. But at the same, as the governor said earlier, most people care about how they can get along in their everyday lives. So for progressives, and I think most of us want to win elections in order to improve the everyday lives of ordinary people, of building inclusive societies with opportunities for all. And I mean, this is our core business as progressives. But we also live in a time where we have to fight another fight, and that is for our democracies, with far-right, extremist, even fascist parties that are undermining the pillars of our democracies. And this is a fight about life or death of our democracies. But I'm certain that in order to win that fight, we have to focus on everyday lives of working families in our countries. And we have, the Swedish Social Democrats, spent the 3 years we've had in opposition now, rethinking our policy programs and our strategies. And Keir Starmer said earlier that we have to look ourselves in the mirror. And we have done the work. We have started out by looking out of the window, making an analysis of what Sweden is today and the surroundings and actually the problems we do have. And then looking at ourselves in the mirror, asking ourselves, do we have relevant answers to what Sweden is today? And the answer in some issues has been yes, and in others it has been no. But it's been a very honest process. And this process ended up in new policy proposals, and together with that, we are also having a focus on actually meeting our right-wing extremist party founded by Nazis by trying to be the party that loves Sweden the most. I often say I want Sweden to become a bit more like Sweden. And then what Sweden is, which is easy if you're a Swede maybe, that's a lot of what people are proud of in Sweden was built by the Social Democrats.
But what do you think is the one message that could cut through a lot of this complexity?
I think there is, of course, more than one message. we have this, we want Sweden to become more like Sweden. This is definitely important, and part of that is Swedish values. And then, of course, we say what are Swedish values, and that would be basically all social democratic values. That we say this is Swedish values, these are Swedish values. And then on top of that, a political program. And there I often talk about the triangle that we have expanded with our new policy program. In one dimension, it's about migration and crime. These are very important topics for many, many people in Sweden and in other countries. When it comes to migration, we changed our migration laws after the migration crisis 2015, when Sweden received more asylum seekers than any developed country has ever received. And then we went from very liberal migration laws to very strict, one of the strictest in Europe. At the time, we did it because we had to do it. But what has changed now is that we're not forced to do it. We really, really say this is absolutely necessary, because we have to take care of all those people that do live in Sweden, have the right to be there, but are now out of employment, not schooled enough, and we need to focus there. When it comes to crime, we are much, much tougher on crime than we were before, and this is necessary given the development that we've had in Sweden. So we are more in that direction. We have expanded the triangle in that direction, but we also expanded the triangle when it comes to more traditional social democratic policies, when it comes to, well, our welfare systems, our schools, healthcare, elderly care, but also when it comes to our insurance systems, where we, for instance, want to have better pensions for blue-collar workers, but also better conditions for sick leave, which the system we have now is actually disadvantaged, particularly for blue-collar workers. That's something we want to change. So we're expanding in that direction. And then on top of that, I think more new and more progressive policy when it comes to economic growth, actually promoting new industry and businesses. And this is a good contrast right now when we do have our far-right party that is, as many others, waging a culture war against the green transition and the new green energy industry. And the Swedish industry at least, they are already there. They know this is the future. This is where they want to go. So there we have a good contrast, and we actually do have the Swedish business industry on our side right now.
Yeah, you alluded to your stance on crime. Some progressives might feel as though sometimes a tough stance when it comes to crime may reinforce the very narratives populists may thrive on. I mean, how do you go about avoiding that?
Well, the development we've had in Sweden when it comes to crimes, shootings, and also crime going to younger and younger, even children, there is no other issue, but there's no other possible stance to be tough on crime. This is a main concern of Swedish citizens, for a good reason. But also there, the government and the Sweden Democrats, they are only focusing on when it comes to punishments and more police, which of course is necessary. We vote together with them on the same stance in Parliament most of the time. We need to do that. But on top of that, we have more proposals, both when it comes to actually getting to the gang leaders with the kind of legislation you have in the US, the RICO legislation that has been efficient to tackle the mafia in the US before. And then, of course, also, which is more traditional social democratic, a more thought-through program when it comes to avoiding new generations entering into criminality. And also a part of that is an ambitious program to lift up those parts, those neighborhoods that are disadvantaged right now, with problems with poverty, unemployment, schools that is not delivering, open drug scenes, to actually have a true program trying to lift those neighborhoods.
And whilst you're lifting those neighborhoods, I mean, how would you go around reassuring people who feel slightly unsafe or unheard in their communities? How would you reassure people who feel
by
unsafe?
Having really good policies and really having a program for lifting these neighborhoods to integrate people into the Swedish society. And that's also a good contrast to the Sweden Democrats, because they don't want that. And most people realize that they want to get people out of the country. But if people have permanent residency and even are Swedish citizens, they will stay in Sweden. And most people realize that. So having a good program to actually make sure people get into the labor market, start working, pay their taxes, be a part of the Swedish society. That is really the way forward. But of course, with the very high migration we have had in Sweden, of course, there is a discussion on Swedish values, which is also a concern of many people in our country. And that's also the reason why we are actually trying to be there, showing that we also care about Swedish values, and not being afraid of talking about Swedish values, but also defining what are then Swedish values. Like, we don't value the people that is in front of us according to where they were born, what they believe in, or if they're a man or a woman, but actually the person that is in front of us. Standing for gender equality, inclusive societies, dislike of hierarchies, but a love of standing in line just like the British.
Just touching on the economy, cost of living and climate, after years of high inflation and a cost of living squeeze, and the now escalating climate pressures, what does a progressive economic policy look like, and how do you capture the sort of mood of ordinary people while still driving that transformation?
I think we really have to discuss short-term and long-term at the same time. In the short term, of course, we have to make things easier here and now for ordinary families. If that is tax cuts for low-income earners, or if it's different kind of handouts, lowering VAT or whatever, that is necessary to do here and now. But at the same time, we can never become rich societies if we don't have a better economic growth, if we don't have a economic growth policy that actually makes sure that investments, jobs, and wealth come to European countries or wherever you come from. That is absolutely necessary for progressive movements to also have a forward-looking growth policy, industrial policy, to make sure that we have societies and economies where we can have real income wage growth. That is absolutely necessary in the long run. But in the short run, we have to help ordinary working families.
And when it comes to redistribution, how could you fund bold investment without losing your sort of fiscal credibility?
You're asking someone who was Minister of Finance for 7.5 years. I think I was once called the most frugal in Europe, which I thought was a compliment. But to be honest, there are no free lunches. If you want to spend money, you have to make the money come in one way or another. Having a good growth policy, of course, is one way of actually increasing the possibilities of a government to have money to spend. But otherwise, you have to either you can increase taxes or you can cut spending. That's the way to finance things: growth, increase taxes, cut spending. And of course, we aren't in just any circumstances right now with the situation in Ukraine, with the U.S. stance on European security. I think for those countries that do have fiscal space also when it comes to public debt, this is the time where you could actually use some of that fiscal space you have. So for that reason, actually, the Social Democrats in Sweden, we have proposed that when we now increase our defense spending very dramatically, part of that could temporarily also be financed by loans. But many European countries don't have that fiscal space. They already have too high public debt.
Can we just sort of move towards this green transition notion? How could you make sure that it doesn't sound like some sort of big elitist project and it's something tangible for ordinary households?
I think, and actually I think the Labour in Britain has done a good job there, talking about the fact that this is a way to get investments and good paying jobs to your country. The green transition will happen anyway, no matter what Sweden is doing. And the question is, this will be the future in the global economy. And the question is, do we want to be there in the front of this technological shift that will happen anyway, and make sure that investments and jobs and wealth comes to Sweden? So talking about the green transition as part of job creation, I think is an important way going forward. And I think I also sometimes I think that the prospect I see for Sweden in the future is not to be dependent on fossil fuels from dictators in other parts of the world, or from batteries produced by the Chinese Communist Party. I think we could do more ourselves.
And just reflecting on your leadership, Sweden broke 200 years of neutrality and applied to NATO. How difficult was it back then to bring your party and your voters with you? And are there any sort of tips you can share with your fellow progressive leaders who are with us today?
Well, I hope no one has to end up in that situation. But after Russia's invasion in Ukraine, but also how Putin was talking about both Sweden and Finland and our ability to make our own policy choices when it comes to our security, that completely shifted how we could see on our own security. I mean, before there was a agreement that every country has the right to make their own choices when it comes to their security, and now all of a sudden Putin was trying to say that he would have an influence or decide Sweden's choices. That was a complete shift, and then we had to just sit down and think, okay, we are in a new situation, and what is the best for the Swedish people and our country's security at this point in time? And we had a very open discussion on that within our party in the executive committee. And I think what was important was that we were actually spending so much time together with open minds, really thinking what is best now. And the fact that we actually did this together, I think, was very important for us to end up where we were, where we decided this was the best thing for Sweden, and that it wasn't, of course, for some party members this was painful, but all in all, we came through this process together in the party without too many deep scars.
Just finally, the nickname, the bulldozer. How does that make you feel?
Oh, I'm very proud of the nickname bulldozer.
And on that note, we're going to thank Magdalena Andersson so much for joining us here at the summit. And we will be taking a short lunch break. We'll be heading back in here for around 1:25 sharp. So please use this time to connect and exchange ideas. And yeah, we'll see you after lunch.